They say an Alpha King rules through power, through fear, through the kind of dominance that makes grown men drop their eyes and strong women forget how to breathe. But nobody tells you what happens when that same king starts dying from the inside out because he's too damn broken to claim the one thing that could save him. This is the story of Draven Kalor, the ruler who conquered 3 kingdoms before 30 and couldn't conquer the war inside his own chest. Stay until the end, because this gets darker before it gets anywhere close to light. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments so I know my tribe is watching. Bashtoshti. The wolves smelled death on their king before anyone else noticed. It started small. A tremor in his left hand during morning council. The way his golden eyes unfocused for half a second when General Thorn presented battlefield reports. How he gripped the obsidian throne until his knuckles went white, like the stone itself might anchor him to something real. Draven Kalor had killed his first enemy at 14, led his first battalion at 19, took the crown at 22 when his father's throat was opened by a traitor's blade in the Great Hall. He'd spent the last 8 years turning Velkrayne from a struggling kingdom into an empire that made neighboring territories send tribute just to avoid his attention. But power doesn't prepare you for the thing growing inside your chest that feels like slow rot. The mate bond had been gnawing at him for 2 years now. 2 years since he first caught her scent in the lower archives and his wolf had gone absolutely feral beneath his skin. 2 years of fighting an instinct older than the kingdom itself. 2 years of slowly coming apart. He didn't sleep anymore. Not really. 4 hours maximum before his body jerked him awake with his heart hammering and his sheets soaked through with sweat that smelled wrong. Like something was burning him from the inside. The royal physician called it exhaustion. The High Chancellor called it stress. Draven called it what it was. Dying by degrees because he was too much of a coward to claim what was his. The council chamber at dawn was always cold. Black marble floors. Iron sconces burning low. Velkrayne's war table stretched across the center like an altar to violence. Maps and territory markers scattered across its scarred surface. 7 generals, 4 noble houses, the High Chancellor, and 1 king who was holding himself together with spite and willpower. General Thorn was mid-sentence about supply routes when Draven's vision doubled, just for a second. The room tilted, sound stretched thin. He tasted copper, then it snapped back. Nobody noticed. He'd gotten good at hiding it. Your Majesty, we've received reports of movement along the eastern border. Thorn's voice was gravel and smoke. 300 soldiers, possibly more. Lord Cassian's banner. Draven's jaw tightened. Cassian Mordrek, ambitious warlord with an army big enough to be dangerous and just enough cunning to know when to strike. How long until they reach the capital? 4 days, maybe 5 if the mountain passes slow them down. Deploy the 2nd Battalion to intercept. Draven's voice came out flat. Controlled, the way it always did when everything inside him wanted to break things. I want prisoners. Find out who's funding this. The generals exchanged glances, that particular look that meant they were thinking things they'd never say out loud. High Chancellor Valeth leaned forward from her position at the far end of the table. Tall woman, sharp-featured, eyes like a predator evaluating prey. Your Majesty, perhaps we should consider a more permanent solution to Lord Cassian's ambitions. Meaning? Meaning the eastern houses are restless. They see opportunity. Her fingers drummed once against the marble. They see weakness. The temperature in the room dropped. Every man at that table had seen Draven kill, had watched him tear through enemy lines like something unleashed from the old nightmares their grandmothers used to tell. They knew what he was capable of when the leash came off. But Violeth had been governing beside him for 6 years. She didn't scare easy. Elaborate. His voice was too quiet. The dangerous kind of quiet. The king has been distracted. Illness. Fatigue. The court notices these things. Enemies notice these things. She met his eyes without flinching. Cassian is testing your defenses because he thinks you've gone soft. Draven stood. The chair scraped back. The sound cut through the chamber like a blade. He walked around the table slowly. Every general there was Alpha-born. Strong, trained, men who'd commanded armies and survived wars. Every single one of them looked down when he passed. The wolf inside him rose up beneath his skin. Not shifting, not yet, but present, waiting. He stopped behind Valeth's chair. "You think I've gone soft, Chancellor?" To her credit, she didn't flinch. "I think you're fighting a battle nobody else can see, and I think it's killing you." The silence stretched. Then Draven laughed, low and bitter and sharp enough to draw blood. "You're not wrong." He walked back to his throne and sat down like his body weighed twice what it should. "Deploy the battalion. Bring me Cassian alive if possible, dead if necessary." Council dismissed. They filed out quickly, grateful for the escape. All except Valeth. She stood there with her arms crossed and that expression she got when she was about to say something he didn't want to hear. "You need to claim her." Draven's hands tightened on the armrests. "Get out. The bond is destroying you from the inside. I've watched it happen for 2 years. You barely sleep. Your judgment is compromised. The kingdom needs—" I said, "Get out." His eyes had started to change, gold bleeding darker, black creeping in from the edges. Valeth held his stare for 3 long seconds. Then she left. Draven sat alone in the empty council chamber and felt the thing inside him twist tighter. Liriana Vale had been working in the palace archives for 6 weeks, and she still wasn't used to the wolves. They didn't do anything, didn't growl or bare teeth or act threatening. They just watched, yellow eyes tracking her movement through the corridors like she was something that didn't belong, which she wasn't. Human girl from a farming province. Father was a low-level scribe who'd taught her 6 languages before she turned 12. Mother died when she was young enough that grief felt like background noise instead of fresh pain. She'd built a life around books and translations because words made sense. People didn't. Politics definitely didn't. Then the royal summons arrived. Black wax seal. The king's mark. 3 sentences that changed everything. "Your services are required at Velkrayne Palace. You will decode the Covenant archives. Refusal is not an option." So here she was. Underground, in a series of chambers that smelled like old leather and older secrets. The texts were insane, wolf-hide scrolls, iron tablets, stone carvings that looked like they'd been made by people who understood violence as religion. The language was ancient, pre-empire, the kind of thing most scholars thought was extinct. Liriana was on her 4th manuscript when she realized what she was actually reading. A curse, not metaphorical, not symbolic. An actual blood curse woven into the foundation of the Velkrayne bloodline. Her hands had started shaking halfway through the translation. The Alpha King who refuses his true mate will lose himself piece by piece. First judgment, then instinct, then soul. The throne and the king are bound together. When one falls, both fall. The empire will collapse alongside its dying ruler. She read it 3 times to make sure she wasn't mistaken. Then she heard footsteps behind her. Liriana spun around so fast she knocked over the oil lamp on her work table. It clattered against stone but didn't break. A man stood in the archway. Not a guard, not a servant. The king. She'd seen him exactly twice since arriving at the palace. Once from a distance during a formal ceremony, once passing through a corridor while surrounded by generals who looked like walking armories. Up close was different. He was taller than she expected, broader. The kind of build that came from actual violence instead of decorative training. Dark hair pushed back from a face that would have been handsome if it wasn't carved from something that looked like controlled fury. But it was his eyes that made her forget how to breathe. Gold, almost burning, and currently fixed on her like she was the only thing in the room worth noticing. "Your Majesty." She dropped into something resembling a curtsy because her brain had stopped working properly. "I didn't—" "Stop." His voice was rough. Like he didn't use it much for anything except giving orders. She stopped. He walked into the chamber slowly, each step deliberate, controlled, like he was deciding whether to get closer or turn around and leave. The bond hit her before he was halfway across the room. It wasn't subtle, wasn't gentle. It felt like someone had reached into her chest and grabbed hold of something vital and pulled. Liriana gasped. Draven stopped moving. They stared at each other across 12 feet of ancient stone and 2 years of denial. You feel it, not a question, a statement, flat, almost angry. She nodded because her voice wasn't working. "How long?" "Since I arrived. Since the first day." She swallowed hard. I thought I was sick. Thought something in the archives was making me. It's not the archives. He turned away from her, walked over to examine one of the iron tablets mounted on the far wall, like he needed something else to look at. You're translating the covenant texts. Yes. What have you found? Liriana's hands were still shaking. She pressed them flat against the work table. A curse. On the Alpha bloodline. On kings who refuse their mates. His shoulders tightened. Keep going, Your Majesty. Keep going. She picked up the manuscript with fingers that didn't feel steady, started reading the translation out loud in a voice that kept wanting to crack. An Alpha King who denies the mate bond will enter a state called the Beast Crown, all humanity stripped away, all restraint gone. He will rule through domination and slaughter until either the Empire or the mate is destroyed. The silence after she finished was so complete she could hear her own heartbeat. Draven didn't turn around. How long until it's irreversible? The text doesn't say. But there are signs. Blackouts. Loss of control. Violent instincts that override judgment. She paused. Exhaustion that feels like dying. He laughed, sharp and bitter. Sounds about right. Then he turned back to face her, and the expression on his face made her chest hurt. You need to understand something. His voice had gone quiet. Dangerous. The last woman I trusted with the mate bond nearly destroyed this kingdom. She manipulated it, used it to seize power. Thousands of people died because I was too blind to see what she really was. Queen Seraphine. Liriana had heard the stories. Everyone had. The beautiful queen who'd orchestrated a civil massacre, the public execution, the king who'd buried his heart with her corpse. So you'd rather die than risk it again. Yes, even if it destroys the empire. His jaw tightened. I've kept this empire alive for 8 years through pure will and violence. I'll find another way. There is no other way. She stepped forward without thinking. The curse is already active. You're already changing. I can control it. For how long? As long as it takes. Until what? Until you lose yourself completely? Until you slaughter your own generals during a blackout? Until Velkrayne tears itself apart because the king went feral? Enough. The command hit her like physical force, alpha presence rolling off him in waves that made her wolf instincts scream to submit. Except she didn't have wolf instincts. She was human, and humans didn't have the same hardwired obedience. Liriana held her ground. You brought me here to translate these texts. She gestured at the manuscripts surrounding them. So I'm translating them. And they all say the same thing. The bond isn't optional, it's survival. Draven crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. Suddenly, he was right there, close enough that she could see the black bleeding into his golden eyes, close enough to smell blood and smoke and something wild underneath. You don't understand what you're asking. Then explain it to me. I don't know how to trust this. His voice had gone rough, raw. I don't know how to let someone in without it being a weapon they use to destroy everything I've built. So you'd rather destroy it yourself? If that's what it takes to keep control, yes. They were close enough now that she could feel the heat coming off him, could see the tension in his shoulders, the exhaustion buried so deep he probably didn't even recognize it anymore. You're not in control, she said it quietly, gently. You're barely holding on. Something in his expression cracked, just for a second. Then the walls slammed back up and he stepped away like she'd burned him. Continue the translations. Report your findings to the High Chancellor. He walked toward the archway without looking back. Your Majesty. He paused. The curse can be broken. I haven't found all the texts yet, but there are references to a solution, a way to survive the bond without losing yourself. Draven stood there for a long moment. Then he left without answering. Liriana waited until his footsteps faded completely before she let herself shake. The assassination attempt happened 3 days later. Liriana was walking back to her chambers through the East Wing corridor when the blade came out of nowhere. She saw movement in her peripheral vision. Instinct made her duck. The knife embedded itself in the stone column behind her head. She spun around. 2 men. Dressed like palace guards, but something was wrong. Their eyes, the way they moved, too coordinated, too focused. The second blade was already coming. She dove sideways, hit the floor hard enough to knock the air from her lungs. One of them grabbed her hair, yanked her head back. She felt cold steel against her throat. Then the world exploded. Draven hit the assassin like a natural disaster. The man went flying, slammed into the opposite wall hard enough to crack stone. Didn't get back up. The second assassin pulled a short sword. Draven didn't bother with weapons. He shifted mid-stride. Not completely, just enough. Claws extended, eyes gone full black, the kind of partial transformation that was somehow worse than going full wolf. The fight lasted maybe 10 seconds. It wasn't elegant, wasn't controlled. It was pure violence delivered with surgical precision. When it was over, both assassins were dead, and Draven was standing in the middle of the corridor covered in blood that wasn't his. His chest was heaving, claws still extended, eyes still black. Liriana was pressed against the wall, trying to remember how breathing worked. He turned toward her. She should have been terrified, should have run, should have done anything except stare at the monster wearing a king's face. But the bond was singing, loud and insistent, and absolutely certain that she was safe. "You're bleeding!" His voice came out rough. Wrong, like he was fighting to form words. She looked down. There was a cut across her forearm, shallow, probably from when she hit the floor. "It's nothing." He crossed to her in 2 strides, grabbed her wrist. The claws had retracted, but his hands were still shaking. "Who sent them?" "I don't know." "Liriana." His grip tightened. Not painful, but desperate. "Who sent them?" "I don't know. I was just walking back to my chambers and they—" Guards flooded the corridor, 6 of them, then a dozen, all with weapons drawn until they saw the bodies and their king standing over a human woman like something out of the old nightmares. General Thorne pushed through the crowd, took one look at the scene, and his expression went carefully blank. "Your Majesty, get her to the royal wing." Draven's voice had steadied, but his eyes were still wrong. "Post guards outside her door. No one gets in. No one gets out. Find out who these men were and who they answered to." "Sire, perhaps the lady should be questioned." "Now, General?" Thorne knew better than to argue. 2 guards moved to escort Liriana away. She looked back once before they turned the corner. Draven was still standing there, surrounded by corpses, still covered in blood, still fighting something that lived beneath his skin. Their eyes met across the corridor, and for just a second she saw past the monster to the man underneath. Terrified, desperate, dying by degrees because he was too broken to reach for the one thing that could save him. Tagged. The royal wing was obscene. Vaulted ceilings, gold inlay, windows that overlooked the entire capital like the view itself was a statement of power. They put her in chambers 3 doors down from the king's personal suite. Liriana spent the first hour pacing, the second hour trying to calm down, the third hour giving up and diving back into the manuscript translations because at least words made sense. The knock came just after midnight. She opened the door expecting guards, got Draven instead. He'd cleaned up, changed clothes. The blood was gone, but he still looked like he'd been through a war. "May I come in?" She stepped aside. He walked past her into the sitting room and stopped in the center like he wasn't sure what to do next. "They gave you the Queen's chambers." Liriana blinked. "What?" "These rooms." He gestured vaguely. "They haven't been used since Seraphine died. I told them to prepare guest quarters in the Scholars' Wing. Apparently someone made an executive decision." "Apparently." The silence stretched. He looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tired that came from fighting yourself for too long. "You came to check on me." "I came to apologize." He turned to face her. "For what happened in the corridor, for losing control, for... You saved my life." I nearly shifted completely. In the middle of the palace, in front of guards and servants and anyone who could spread the story across the kingdom by morning, his hands curled into fists. "That's not control. That's the opposite of control. You were protecting me. I was feral. There's a difference." Liriana crossed her arms. "Why do you do that?" "Do what?" "Punish yourself for every mistake, every moment of weakness. Like being human is something you need to apologize for." "I'm not human." "You're not a monster either." His laugh was bitter. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." She stepped closer. "Because a monster wouldn't be standing here apologizing, wouldn't care about losing control, wouldn't be fighting this hard to hold on to his humanity." Draven's expression did something complicated. "The texts you've been translating, Have you found the solution yet? The way to break the curse? Not yet, but I'm close. There are references to something called the First Covenant, an original blood oath buried somewhere beneath the palace. She paused. I think the answer is there. How long? A few days? Maybe a week? I don't have a week. She saw it then. The cracks spreading deeper, the exhaustion winning. What happened tonight? The blackouts are getting worse, longer. I lost almost an hour before I found you in that corridor. He ran a hand through his hair. I don't remember walking there. Don't remember hearing you scream. I just came back to myself standing over those bodies, and you're still refusing the bond, because I don't know how to do this. His voice cracked. I don't know how to let you in without losing everything else, without becoming what Seraphine turned me into. What did she turn you into? Weak, manipulated. A king who chose love over duty and watched his empire burn for it. That's not weakness. Liriana moved closer. That's trust. And she betrayed it. Exactly. So you'd rather die than risk being betrayed again. He didn't answer. The bond pulled at her, insistent, demanding. She could feel him fighting it, fighting himself, fighting the instinct that said she was his and he was hers and nothing else mattered. I'm not her, I know. Then why? Because what if I'm wrong? He finally looked at her, really looked. What if I claim you and the bond breaks me anyway? What if I lose myself and take you with me? What if you don't? That's not good enough. Why not? Because I've built an empire on certainty, on control, on knowing exactly what I'm capable of and never letting it slip. His voice had gone rough again. You're asking me to step off a cliff and hope I survive the fall. No. She closed the last of the distance between them. I'm asking you to trust that someone will catch you. They stood there, close enough to touch, close enough that she could see gold fighting back against the black in his eyes. Draven lifted one hand, hesitated, then brushed his fingers against her cheek so gently it made her chest hurt. I don't know how. Then learn. The bond flared between them, hot and insistent and absolutely certain. He pulled back like she'd burned him. I should go. Stay. I can't. Why not? Because if I stay, I'll claim you, and I'm not ready for what that means. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the handle. Lock this behind me. Don't open it for anyone except the guards I assigned personally. Then he was gone. Liriana stood in the empty chambers that used to belong to a dead queen and felt the thing inside her chest pull tighter. The War Council convened at dawn. Every major house, every general, the High Chancellor, and one king who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. General Thorne stood at the war table with reports spread across the scarred surface. The assassins were mercenaries, hired through intermediaries. No direct connection to any noble house, but the payment came from somewhere inside the palace. Draven's hands were flat on the table. Someone on my council tried to have her killed. Potentially. Not potentially. Definitely. His voice was too calm. Find out who. I want names. Your Majesty. Lord Garrett cleared his throat. Perhaps we should discuss why a human scholar is being kept in the Queen's chambers. Because I put her there. With respect, sire, the court is asking questions. About the woman. About your judgment. About whether I've lost my mind? Garrett had the grace to look uncomfortable. Draven straightened. Let me make something very clear. Liriana Vale is under my personal protection. Anyone who threatens her threatens me. Anyone who questions that decision can take it up with me directly. High Chancellor Vaelith leaned forward. Your Majesty, the Eastern houses are using this. They're spreading rumors that you've been bewitched, that the human woman is manipulating you through forbidden blood magic. Let them talk. Talk turns into action. Cassian Mordrek is already gathering support among the nobles who think you've gone soft. Then perhaps it's time I remind everyone exactly how soft I am. The temperature in the room dropped. Vaelith held his stare. Starting a war with your own court is not the answer. I didn't start this. They did when they sent assassins into my palace. You're playing into their hands. They want you unstable, want you distracted, Want proof that the bond is destroying your judgment. My judgment is fine. Is it? She gestured at the reports. You've had 3 blackouts in the last week. Lost time. Lost control. The generals are worried. The nobles are circling. And you're spending every night standing guard outside chambers that belong to a woman you won't claim. The silence after that was absolute. Every man at that table suddenly found the war maps fascinating. Draven's eyes had started to change again. Gold bleeding darker. You forget yourself, Chancellor. I'm trying to save your kingdom. Baelith stood. Because you're too stubborn to save yourself. Get out. Your Majesty. All of you. Get out. Now. They left. Quickly. Draven stood alone in the council chamber and felt the thing inside him twist so tight he couldn't breathe. The blackouts were getting worse. Baelith was right about that. Yesterday he'd lost almost 3 hours. Came back to himself in the training yards with his knuckles bloody and 2 guards unconscious on the ground. They'd assured him it was just sparring that got out of hand. He knew better. The Beast Crown was winning, and he was running out of time to figure out how to stop it. Sorry. Liriana found the first covenant 2 days later. It was buried beneath the throne room itself, behind a wall that looked solid until she translated the specific sequence carved into the iron tablets. The chamber was small, circular, ancient. At the center stood a stone altar carved with symbols that made her skin crawl. And on that altar lay a single manuscript bound in black leather and written in blood. She spent 6 hours translating it. By the end, her hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the pages. The Beast Crown wasn't just a curse. It was the Alpha bloodline's original defense mechanism, a failsafe woven into their DNA to protect the mate bond from outside manipulation. When an Alpha King refused his true mate, the beast inside him would rise up to force the claim, stripping away everything human, everything civilized, until only pure instinct remained. Dominate, claim, protect. No mercy, no restraint, no choice. The transformation couldn't be reversed through violence, only through surrender. An Alpha survived by conquest, but a true king survived by learning to trust someone enough to stand beside him without fear. Liriana read the final passage 3 times to make sure she understood. Then she heard the screaming. It was coming from above. From the throne room, she ran. The corridors were chaos, guards running, servants fleeing, the smell of blood thick enough to choke on. She burst into the throne room and stopped dead. Draven was in the center of the hall, shifted, partially. The worst kind of transformation where the wolf and the man were fighting for control, and neither was winning. His eyes were completely black. 3 guards were already down, not dead, but close. General Thorne stood between the king and the door with his sword drawn and an expression that said he really didn't want to do this. Your Majesty, stand down! Draven snarled. The sound wasn't human. Thorne's grip tightened on his weapon. Sire, please. Then Draven's head snapped toward the doorway, toward Liriana. The change was instant. His entire body went rigid. The black in his eyes flickered. For just a second, she saw gold bleeding back in. Then it was gone, and he was moving. Straight toward her. Thorne shouted something. Other guards moved to intercept. Liriana held up one hand. Stop! They froze. She walked into the throne room, slowly, carefully, like approaching a wounded animal that might bolt or attack. Draven tracked her movement with eyes that didn't look human anymore. She stopped 10 feet away. I found it. The first covenant. The answer. He tilted his head, listening. Maybe. The curse can't be broken through fighting. She kept her voice steady. It can only be broken through trust. A low growl rumbled through his chest. You've spent your whole life surviving by never letting anyone close, by controlling everything, by making sure you were always strong enough to handle it alone. She took one step closer. But strength isn't the same as survival, and surviving isn't the same as living. Another step. You ask me what happens if you're wrong, if you claim the bond and it breaks you anyway. His muscles tensed. But you never asked what happens if you're right. She was close enough now to touch him, close enough to see the war happening behind those black eyes. Human and beast, king and monster, control and surrender. What if you let me in and nothing breaks? What if the bond saves you instead of destroying you? What if trust isn't weakness? Draven's breathing had gone ragged. She reached up slowly, gave him every chance to pull away. Then she touched his face. The bond exploded between them like a star going supernova. Every wolf in the palace felt it. The beast crown shattered. Draven collapsed forward. She caught him. Barely. They both went down to their knees on the blood-stained marble. His eyes were gold again. Fully human. Fully present. He stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Like she was the only real thing in a world made of ghosts. Then the throne room doors slammed open. High Chancellor Vaelith strode in, flanked by 24 armed guards. And behind her, Lord Cassian Mordrek smiled like a man who'd just won a war. Vaelith's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Draven Kalor, by the authority of the Royal Dominion Council, you are hereby removed from the throne on grounds of mental incapacity and corruption of the mate bond through forbidden blood magic. Guards surrounded them. Liriana felt Draven tense beneath her hands. Vaelith gestured toward Cassian. Lord Mordrek will serve as acting ruler until a formal hearing can be convened. Cassian stepped forward with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Take them both into custody. The guards moved in, and Draven's eyes started bleeding black again. The guards hesitated. Not because they doubted their orders, not because they questioned Vaelith's authority. They hesitated because every instinct hardwired into their wolf DNA was screaming at them not to touch their king, even compromised, even unstable, even with his eyes bleeding black again. He was still Alpha. Draven rose slowly from his knees. Liriana's hand slipped from his face, but she stayed close. Close enough to feel the tremor running through him. Close enough to see him fighting the thing rising up beneath his skin. General Thorne stepped forward with his weapon still drawn but pointed at the ground, a compromise position that said he didn't want this fight but would finish it if necessary. Your Majesty, stand down. Draven's voice came out rough. Wrong. Like something else was speaking through his throat. You dare. Not a question. A statement of fact delivered with enough alpha presence that 3 guards actually dropped their weapons. Cassian Mordrek moved closer to Vaelith with that smile still fixed on his face, the kind of expression that belonged on a man watching someone else bleed. The king is clearly unwell. For the safety of the Empire, he must be removed from power until a proper investigation can be conducted. Investigation? Draven's laugh was sharp enough to draw blood. You orchestrated this. I merely brought evidence to the council, evidence that you've been compromised by forbidden magic, that your judgment has deteriorated, that you're a danger to yourself and everyone around you. Liriana felt rage flood through her so fast it made her vision narrow. This was a coup, clean and legal and wrapped in concern for the kingdom's well-being, and they'd used her as the weapon. The human scholar who'd bewitched the king, the outsider who'd corrupted the mate bond, the convenient excuse to remove a ruler who'd gotten too unstable to control. She stepped forward before her brain could stop her mouth. He's lying. Every eye in the throne room turned toward her. Cassian's smile widened. The human speaks. How charming. The king isn't compromised. The bond isn't corruption. It's the only thing keeping him alive. According to manuscripts you translated, Vaelith's voice was cold. Convenient that the evidence supporting your claim comes from your own research. The texts are ancient, pre-Empire. They're not subject to interpretation. Everything is subject to interpretation. The High Chancellor crossed her arms, especially when delivered by someone with obvious bias. My bias? You're his mate. Of course you'd say whatever necessary to protect him. I'm protecting the truth. The truth? Cassian stepped closer. Is that your king has had multiple violent episodes, has lost time, has attacked his own guards, that he's deteriorating rapidly and taking the Empire with him, because he's been fighting the bond for 2 years. Liriana's hands curled into fists. The curse is destroying him from the inside, specifically because he refused to claim it. Then perhaps he should have claimed it sooner. Vaelith gestured at the unconscious guards being carried from the hall. Before it came to this, he was trying to protect the kingdom from another Seraphine, and instead he's created something worse, a king too unstable to rule, too dangerous to trust, too broken to save. The words hit like physical blows. Liriana saw Draven flinch, saw the black in his eyes flicker, saw him fighting to hold on to something that kept slipping through his fingers. She turned to face him. Don't listen to them. His jaw was clenched so tight she could see muscle jumping beneath skin. They're right. No, they're not. Look at me, his voice cracked. Look at what I've become. I am looking, and I see a man fighting harder than anyone I've ever met to hold on to his humanity. Humanity doesn't attack its own guards. You were protecting me. I don't remember doing it. His hands were shaking. I lost 3 hours, came back covered in blood with no memory of how I got here. The bond flared between them, hot and insistent. Then claim it. Stop fighting. Trust me. I can't. Why not? Because if I claim you and the beast crown wins anyway, I'll destroy you, and I'd rather die than watch that happen. The honesty in his voice made her chest hurt. Cassian cleared his throat. How touching. Unfortunately, sentiment doesn't change facts. The king is unfit. The council has voted. Guards, take them into custody. This time the guards moved. Draven's body went rigid. Liriana felt the shift coming before it happened, felt the wolf rising up, felt control slipping away like water through broken fingers. She grabbed his arm. Don't! He looked at her with eyes that were more beast than man. Please! Her voice dropped. Trust me. For one impossible second, she thought he might. Then General Thorn made the mistake of reaching for his king's shoulder. Draven moved. Not a shift. Not an attack. Just pure speed and violence delivered with surgical precision. Thorn hit the marble floor hard enough to crack stone. 4 guards rushed forward. They didn't make it halfway. Liriana had seen him fight in the corridor, had watched him kill 2 assassins with brutal efficiency. This was different. This was the Beast Crown taking over. No restraint, no mercy. Just raw dominance expressed through broken bones and blood on expensive marble. She should have been terrified, should have run, should have done anything except step directly into his path. Draven stopped mid-strike with his claws extended and his eyes completely black. Looked at her like he was seeing something that didn't make sense. Liriana held her ground. The bond pulled at both of them, demanding, insistent, absolutely certain that they belonged to each other. I'm not afraid of you. You should be. I know, but I'm not. His breathing had gone ragged. Behind them, Cassian was shouting orders. Guards were regrouping. Valith was calling for reinforcements. None of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the choice happening right now in this moment between a dying king and the woman who could save him, if he was willing to let her. Claim the bond. She said it quietly, firmly. Or watch everything burn. I don't know how. Yes, you do. You've always known. You're just too scared to try. Something in his expression cracked. The black in his eyes flickered, gold bleeding back in around the edges. Then arrows hit the windows. Not figuratively, actual arrows, dozens of them, smashing through the stained glass high above the throne room and raining down like deadly hail. Chaos erupted instantly. Guards scattered. Nobles screamed. Someone was shouting about an attack on the palace. Draven grabbed Liriana and pulled her against his chest, hard enough to knock the air from her lungs. His body curved around hers, protecting, shielding. An arrow buried itself in the marble where she'd been standing 2 seconds earlier. More came through the shattered windows, more shouting, the sound of steel on steel from somewhere outside the throne room. General Thorn hauled himself upright with blood running from his temple. We're under attack, Eastern forces. They breached the outer walls. Cassian's smile had finally disappeared. How many? Unknown, possibly thousands. Valith's expression went cold and calculating. This is coordinated. Someone knew the palace would be vulnerable during the council session. Someone did know. All eyes turned back to Cassian. His face had gone very carefully blank. Thorn's hand moved to his sword. Lord Mordrek, would you care to explain how enemy forces knew exactly when to strike? I'm sure I have no idea what you're implying. I'm implying treason. That's a serious accusation, General, and yet here we are, under attack, with you conveniently positioned to assume the throne. His voice went dangerously quiet. Funny how that worked out. Cassian took a step back. The guards who'd been moving to arrest Draven suddenly weren't sure which direction to point their weapons. Another volley of arrows came through the windows. One guard went down, then another. The throne room doors burst open. A runner came through, young, terrified, barely old enough to hold the royal colors. The Eastern army is at the inner gates. They're demanding the king's surrender in exchange for sparing the city. Draven's arms tightened around Liriana. She felt his heartbeat against her spine, felt the tension in every muscle, felt him making calculations that would determine whether thousands lived or died. How long can the inner defenses hold? The runner swallowed hard. Hours, maybe less. They brought siege weapons. Velith stepped forward. Your Majesty, perhaps surrender. No. His voice cut through the chaos like a blade. I don't surrender. Then we fight. Thorn moved toward the tactical maps still spread across the war table. We have enough forces to mount a defense. If we can hold until reinforcements arrive from the western provinces, we don't have time for reinforcements. Draven released Liriana slowly, reluctantly, like letting go physically hurt. This was planned, coordinated. They knew exactly when to strike, because someone told them. All eyes moved to Cassian again. He'd been backing toward a side exit. Now he froze. Arrest him! Draven's command hit like physical force. Anyone who resists joins him in the cells. 4 guards moved immediately. Not the ones Cassian had brought. The old guard. The men who'd served under Draven since he took the crown. Cassian pulled a knife. He didn't get to use it. Thorn disarmed him in 2 moves and had him on his knees in 3. The warlord looked up at Draven with pure hatred burning behind his eyes. You're already dead, just too stupid to know it. Probably. Draven walked closer. But I'll make sure you don't outlive me. He turned to Thorn. Take him to the black cells. Post triple guard. If he so much as breathes wrong, execute him. Sire. Thorn hesitated. If you're going to lead the defense, I am. Your condition is irrelevant. We're under siege. I'm still king. That's all that matters. The general held his stare for 3 long seconds. Then he nodded. Cassian was dragged away, still spitting threats and curses. Velith stepped forward carefully, like approaching something that might bite. Your Majesty, we need to discuss strategy. We need to end this war before it destroys the capital. Draven moved to the war table. Get me current positions, troop numbers, weak points in their siege formation. The High Chancellor didn't move. You're in no condition to lead an army. I've led armies in worse condition, not while fighting the Beast Crown. Then I'll fight faster. That's not a strategy. That's suicide. His hands flattened on the war table. Do you have a better option? The silence stretched. Liriana watched power shift in real time. Watched the woman who'd tried to remove him from the throne realize she'd miscalculated badly. Because dying king or not, unstable or not, compromised or not, Draven Kalor was still the only thing standing between Velkrayne and total collapse. And Velith knew it. The High Chancellor inclined her head. Very slightly. The political equivalent of surrender. What are your orders? Draven started issuing commands. Fast. Precise. The kind of tactical brilliance that came from 8 years of turning impossible situations into victories. Deploy the 2nd and 4th battalions to reinforce the inner gates. Pull the reserve forces from the western barracks. I want archers on every tower. Siege weapons positioned at cardinal points. Thorn was already marking positions on the maps. What about the eastern nobles inside the palace? House arrest. All of them. Anyone with family connections to Cassian gets locked down until this is over. Some of them have private armies. Then disarm them. Resistance means execution. I don't have time for politics. A runner appeared with updated reports, more bad news written across his face. The eastern forces brought battering rams. They're targeting the central gate. How long? An hour. Maybe less. Draven's jaw tightened. Liriana saw the calculation happening behind his eyes, saw him weighing options that all led to blood. She stepped forward. There's another way. Every eye turned toward her. The First Covenant. The original blood oath. She moved to the war table. It's not just about breaking the curse. It's about what the Alpha bloodline was created for, which is defense, protection. The founders of Velkrayne forged the mate bond as a weapon, not against enemies, against themselves. Draven's expression went very still. Explain. An Alpha alone rules through dominance, through fear, through violence that eventually consumes everything. She traced the siege positions marked on the map. But an Alpha bonded to his true mate rules through something stronger, which is unity. Every wolf in the Empire feels the bond when it's claimed, feels the connection, feels the strength. She looked up at him. You've been fighting alone your entire life, trying to hold the kingdom together through pure willpower, but that's not how the bond works. That's not how any of this works. The room had gone completely silent. You're saying if I claim the bond, it strengthens the entire empire. I'm saying it was designed to. The bloodline isn't cursed, it's incomplete without the mate. Velith leaned forward. That's a theory, not fact. It's in the texts. All of them, every archive, every scroll. The mate bond isn't a weakness. Then why does refusing it cause the beast crown? Because the bond protects itself. Liriana gestured at Draven. When an alpha refuses his mate, the beast rises to force the claim. It's a failsafe, a survival mechanism. Thorn cleared his throat. With respect, my lady, this is fascinating, but we have an army at the gates. Then let them in. Everyone stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Not literally. Liriana's hands pressed flat on the war table. But stop fighting defensively. Stop trying to hold them back. Give them what they want. My surrender? Draven's voice was flat. No. A king who's strong enough to face them head on. She met his eyes. Claim the bond. Walk out those gates. Show them exactly what you're capable of when you stop fighting yourself. That's insane. Is it? Or is it the only move they're not expecting? The silence after that was absolute. Draven stared at her like he was trying to decide if she was brilliant or suicidal. Possibly both. You want me to claim the bond in the middle of a siege, walk into an army of thousands, and hope they're impressed enough to surrender. I want you to show them why you've ruled this empire for 8 years, not through fear, through strength, real strength, the kind that comes from being whole instead of broken. His hands were shaking. She could see him fighting it, fighting the hope, fighting the possibility that maybe trust wasn't weakness after all. What if it doesn't work? Then we die. But at least we die together, instead of you dying alone. The throne room doors burst open again. Another runner, covered in blood, barely standing. The central gate is failing. They're through the outer courtyard. We have minutes. Draven closed his eyes. Liriana watched him make the hardest decision of his life. When he opened them again, the black was gone. Completely. Just pure gold burning like fire. He turned to Thorn. Pull all forces back to the throne room. Defensive positions only. No one engages until I give the order. Sire. That's a command, General. Thorn hesitated for half a second. Then he moved. Velith stepped forward. Your Majesty, if you're planning what I think you're planning, then stop me. Draven's voice was steady, calm. The kind of calm that came right before violence. Or take a step back and let me save this kingdom my way. The High Chancellor held his stare. Then she stepped back. Draven turned to Liriana. The bond flared between them, hot and bright and absolutely certain. This is insane. I know. If it doesn't work, it will work. You can't know that. Yes, I can. She moved closer. Because you're not him anymore. Not the king who ruled alone. Not the alpha who thought trust was weakness. Then who am I? Mine. The word hung in the air between them. Draven's breathing had gone shallow. Outside, the sounds of battle were getting closer, steel on steel, screaming, the deep boom of battering rams hitting reinforced gates. He reached for her face with hands that were finally steady. If I claim you and the beast crown wins anyway, it won't. How do you know? Because I'm not afraid, and neither are you, not anymore. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. The bond pulled at both of them, demanding, insistent. Trust me. She said it so quietly only he could hear. Draven leaned down and pressed his forehead against hers. The throne room disappeared. The siege. The war. The empire. Nothing existed except this moment and this choice, and the terrifying possibility that maybe love wasn't the thing that destroyed him. Maybe it was the thing that saved him. He kissed her. Not gentle. Not careful. Like a drowning man finally breaking the surface. The mate bond ignited. Every wolf in Velkrayne felt it instantly. The guards in the throne room dropped to their knees, not from command, from instinct, from something ancient and primal recognizing its true alpha. Outside the palace walls, the Eastern army felt it too. Soldiers stopped mid-stride. Generals looked up. Even the battering rams went silent, because the bond wasn't just claiming Liriana, it was claiming the Empire. Draven pulled back slowly. His eyes were burning gold, completely clear, completely present. The exhaustion was gone. The tremor, the fractured control. He was whole. Liriana's hands were still pressed against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, strong, steady, not dying anymore. He turned to face the throne room. Every wolf there was on their knees, heads bowed, waiting, rise. They stood as one. His voice when he spoke next carried the kind of authority that made mountains bow. The Eastern Army is at our gates. They think we're weak, think we're divided, think the Empire is ready to fall. He walked to the center of the throne room. Let's show them exactly how wrong they are. General Thorne stepped forward. Your orders, my king? Open the gates. Sire. All of them. Inner, outer, every entrance to this palace. He turned back to Liriana. Then bring me my armor. The courtyard was a killing field waiting to happen. Draven stood at the center wearing black plate armor that looked like it had been forged from nightmares. No crown, no royal colors, just steel and the kind of presence that made trained soldiers forget how to breathe. Liriana stood beside him, unarmed, human, wearing the simple scholar's robes she'd arrived in 6 weeks ago. Behind them, every available soldier in Velkrayne formed ranks, thousands strong, armed and armored and ready to die for their king. The palace gates stood open. Beyond them, the Eastern Army stretched across the battlefield like a living sea of steel and hatred. At their head rode 3 generals on war horses bred for violence. The center one raised his hand. The army stopped. Silence fell across the courtyard, the kind of silence that came right before slaughter. The general walked his horse forward, slowly, until he was close enough to be heard without shouting. King Draven Kalor, your empire is surrounded, your allies are scattered, your strength is broken. Surrender now and we'll spare the city. Draven's voice carried across the battlefield without effort. No. The general's expression went hard. Then you condemn your people to death. I condemn you to understanding exactly what you've walked into, which is a war you can't win. The general laughed. We have 40,000 soldiers, you have maybe 10,000. The mathematics aren't difficult. Mathematics don't account for will, for loyalty, for the kind of strength that comes from being whole instead of broken. Pretty words. They won't stop steel. No. Draven stepped forward. But I will. The bond flared across the battlefield. Every wolf in both armies felt it. The Eastern soldiers looked at each other, uncertain, confused, because the bond wasn't just strength, it was unity. And unity was contagious. The general's horse started backing up, nervous, sensing something its rider couldn't see. What witchcraft is this? Not witchcraft. Truth. Draven's eyes were burning gold. I am Alpha King of Velkrayne, bonded to my true mate, whole, unbroken, and you are standing on my land with weapons drawn against my people. The temperature dropped. The general reached for his sword. Draven moved. Not a shift, not an attack. Just pure alpha presence rolling off him in waves that made 40,000 soldiers take an involuntary step back. The horse reared. The general fell. Hit the ground hard. Draven was standing over him before he could rise. Yield. The word wasn't a request. The general stared up at him with wide eyes. Then he dropped his sword. The sound of it hitting stone echoed across the battlefield. One by one, the Eastern soldiers followed suit. Steel hitting dirt, weapons falling, thousands of them, like dominoes collapsing, because they'd come here expecting a dying king. What they got was something else entirely. Draven's voice carried across the now silent battlefield. You came here thinking Velkrayne was weak, thinking leadership could be taken through force, thinking an empire divided would fall easily. He looked back at Liriana. You were wrong. The bond pulsed between them. Every wolf felt it. This empire doesn't fall. Not to armies, not to ambition, not to men who mistake survival for strength. He turned back to the kneeling soldiers. You have one choice. Swear loyalty to Velkrayne and live, or leave now and never return. The silence stretched. Then the first soldier dropped to his knee, then another, then hundreds. By the time the sun started setting behind the Black Mountains, 40,000 Eastern soldiers had sworn loyalty to the king they'd come to destroy. And Draven Kaler stood in the center of it all with his mate beside him and finally understood what the texts had been trying to tell him. An alpha alone was dangerous. An alpha bonded was unstoppable. But the throne room that night was packed. Every noble house, every general, every soldier who could fit through the doors. Draven sat on the obsidian throne with Liriana standing beside it. Not behind, not separate, beside, as equals. High Chancellor Valeth stepped forward, carefully, like approaching something that might bite. Your Majesty, the Eastern houses have requested an audience. Let them wait. Sire, I said let them wait. His voice was calm, steady. They orchestrated a coup, hired assassins, funded a rebellion. They can wait until I decide what to do with them. Valeth inclined her head. General Thorn moved forward next. What are your orders regarding Lord Cassian? Execute him at dawn, publicly. Let every would-be traitor see what happens when you mistake mercy for weakness. And the nobles who supported him? Strip their titles, confiscate their lands, redistribute to houses that remained loyal. Some of them will resist. Then they'll join Cassian. The room went very quiet. This was the king they remembered, the one who'd taken the crown at 22 and turned rebellion into ash. But something was different now. He wasn't ruling through fear alone anymore. Draven stood. The entire room fell silent. For 8 years, I've held this empire together through violence and control, through making sure everyone feared me more than they feared each other. He looked at Liriana. I was wrong. The nobles shifted nervously. Fear maintains order, but it doesn't build loyalty, doesn't create unity, doesn't make an empire worth ruling. He walked down from the throne. The bond has taught me something I should have learned years ago. Strength isn't about ruling alone. It's about being strong enough to let someone stand beside you. He stopped in the center of the hall. Liriana Vale is my queen, my mate, my equal. Anyone who questions that can leave now. Nobody moved. Good. Because we have a kingdom to rebuild. Kings. Later that night, after the court had dispersed and the palace had finally gone quiet, Draven found Liriana standing on the balcony overlooking the capital. The fires from the siege were still burning in some districts, smoke rising against a sky full of stars. She didn't turn when he approached, just kept staring out at the city they'd almost lost. You saved them. We saved them. She finally looked at him. You're the one who walked out those gates? Because you gave me the strength to do it. No, you had the strength. You just needed to stop being afraid of it. He moved closer until they were side by side. The bond hummed between them. Steady now, solid. I'm still terrified. Of what? Losing this. Losing you. Becoming what Seraphine turned me into. You won't. How do you know? Because she never stood beside you. She stood behind you, used you. The difference matters. Draven was quiet for a long moment. Then he wrapped his arm around her shoulders and pulled her against his chest. Below them, Velkrayne stretched out like a living thing, broken in places, burning in others, but alive, still standing, still his. I don't know how to do this. The honesty in his voice made her chest hurt. How to be a king and a mate and not destroy everything trying to balance both. Then we learn together. What if I fail? Then we fail together. She looked up at him. But I don't think you will. Why not? Because you're not alone anymore. The words settled between them like a promise. Draven leaned down and kissed her, gentle this time, careful, like something precious instead of desperate. When he pulled back, his eyes were clear, steady, not dying anymore, just living, finally. Ticket. The execution happened at dawn. Cassian Mordrek was brought to the central square in chains while thousands watched. He went to his knees on the stone platform without fighting, looked up at Draven with hatred still burning in his eyes. Any last words? Cassian smiled, blood-streaked and broken, but still defiant. You think you've won, but there are others, Dozens of them. Nobles who see what you've become. A king weakened by sentiment, ruled by a human woman. Draven's expression didn't change. Then they'll die too. He drew his sword. The blade was old, forged from obsidian and steel, the same weapon his father had used to take the crown. One clean strike. Cassian's head hit the platform. The crowd erupted, not in horror, in approval, because Velkrayne didn't forgive treason. And Draven Kalor had just reminded everyone exactly what happened when you forgot that. He walked off the platform without looking back. Liriana was waiting at the base of the steps. It's done. She took his hand. Now what? Now we build something better than fear. How? I have no idea. His fingers tightened around hers. But I'm willing to try. They walked back toward the palace together. Behind them, servants were already cleaning the platform. Ahead of them, the Empire waited. Broken in places, scarred in others, but whole. Finally, whole. And in the shadows of the eastern wing, Lady Vaelith watched them go with an expression that said the game wasn't over. Not yet. Because Cassian had been right about one thing. There were others. Nobles who saw the bond as weakness, who saw the human queen as corruption, who believed that an alpha bonded was an alpha compromised, and they were already moving, already planning, already sharpening knives in the dark, while the king thought he'd won. Vaelith turned away from the window, walked to her private chambers, locked the door, and began writing letters to houses that understood power better than sentiment, because she'd served beside Draven Kalor for 6 years, had watched him conquer kingdoms, had believed in his strength. But strength compromised was weakness, and weakness in a king meant the empire would fall. So she would do what needed doing, even if it meant destroying the man she'd once respected, even if it meant bloodshed, even if it meant tearing Velkrayne apart from the inside, because some things were worth more than loyalty. Power was one of them. Survival was another. And High Chancellor Vaelith had spent too long building her influence to watch it crumble because a king fell in love. She sealed the first letter with black wax, then the second, then the third. By the time dawn fully broke over Velkrayne, messages were already on their way to every corner of the empire. And the real war was just beginning. The first sign something was wrong came 3 days after Cassian's execution. Draven was in the strategy room reviewing reconstruction plans when General Thorn arrived with a face that said bad news was coming, and it was coming fast. Your Majesty, we have a problem. Define problem. The Eastern nobles we arrested. Thorn set a parchment on the table. Half of them are dead. Draven's hands went still. Dead how? Poison. Same method, same timing, all within the last 12 hours. That's not possible. They were in separate cells. Triple guard. I know. Which means someone inside the palace wanted them silenced. The general's jaw tightened. That's my assessment. Draven stared at the names written across the parchment. 7 nobles, all with direct ties to Cassian's rebellion, all conveniently eliminated before they could be properly interrogated. Who had access to the cells? Limited. Royal Guard only. Command level clearance. Get me the duty roster. Every guard. Every rotation. I want to know who was where and when. Already done. Thorn pulled out another document. 3 guards had overlapping access to all 7 cells. Names? Captain Harrow, Lieutenant Vex, and Commander Kane. Draven knew all 3. Trusted soldiers. Men who'd served under him for years. Which meant the rot went deeper than he'd thought. Bring them in for questioning, quietly. I don't want this spreading through the ranks. Sire. Thorn hesitated. There's more. Of course there is. We found correspondence in Lord Garrett's chambers before he died. Letters. Coded. We're still working on decryption, but the preliminary translations suggest coordination with multiple houses across the empire. How many houses? At least a dozen. Possibly more. The number hit like a physical blow. A dozen noble houses meant significant military strength, meant resources, meant this wasn't just residual rebellion from Cassian's failed coup. This was organized. Draven's hands curled into fists on the table. Where's the High Chancellor? Last I saw, she was in the Eastern Archives, something about updating the territorial records. Find her. Bring her here. I want her assessment of which houses are most likely compromised. The general left quickly. Draven stood alone in the strategy room and felt something cold settle in his chest. The bond pulsed, steady, warm. Liriana was somewhere in the palace library, safe, protected. But safety was starting to feel like an illusion, because empires didn't fall from outside attacks. They fell from the inside, from the people closest to power who decided they wanted it for themselves. Liriana found the discrepancy by accident. She'd been cross-referencing territorial records with the ancient covenant texts trying to understand the full scope of the Alpha bloodline's reach across Velkrayne. The numbers didn't match: tax revenues from the southern provinces, troop deployments, resource allocations. All of it showed subtle manipulation. Money redirected, soldiers reassigned, supplies rerouted, small enough to avoid immediate notice, large enough to fund a significant military operation. And the authorization signatures all traced back to one office: the High Chancellor. Liriana's hands started shaking. She went through the documents 3 more times to make sure she wasn't mistaken. The pattern was consistent, deliberate, spanning back almost 2 years. Right around the time Draven had first caught her scent and the mate bond had activated. This wasn't opportunistic treason. This was planned, calculated, a long game played by someone who understood power better than loyalty. She gathered the documents and headed for the strategy room, found it empty. The hallways were too quiet. That particular kind of silence that came right before violence. Liriana's instincts screamed at her to find Draven. She made it halfway down the corridor before the guards appeared. 4 of them. Wearing royal colors, but something in their eyes was wrong. "My lady, you need to come with us." "On whose authority?" "The High Chancellor's. She's requested your presence in the council chambers." The council chambers were on the opposite side of the palace from where Draven would be. That felt deliberate. "I need to speak with the king first." "That won't be possible." "Why not?" The lead guard's hand moved to his sword. "Because you're under arrest." Draven knew something was catastrophically wrong when he returned to his chambers and found them empty. Liriana was supposed to be in the library, protected, safe. The bond pulsed, distant, strained, not injured, not dying, but afraid. He was moving before conscious thought caught up, out of his chambers, down the corridor, following the bond like a compass pointing toward the only thing that mattered. He found General Thorne first. "Where is she?" "Sire?" "Liriana. Where is she?" "I don't know. I was bringing the High Chancellor to the strategy room like you ordered, but what?" Velith wasn't in the Eastern Archives. Her staff said she'd been summoned to an emergency council session. "I didn't call an emergency session." The general's expression went very still. They stared at each other while the implications settled like poison. "How many guards answer directly to the High Chancellor?" "Roughly 200, plus another 300 with divided loyalties between the Crown and the Council." Draven's jaw tightened. He'd been so focused on external threats that he'd missed the knife being sharpened inside his own house. "Find her. Lock down the palace. No one in or out until I know where my queen is." "Sire, if Velith has made a move, then she's already dead. She just doesn't know it yet." The bond flared, sharp, urgent. Liriana was in danger, and every instinct in his body was screaming at him to tear the palace apart until he found her. Well, the council chambers looked different at night, darker, colder, like the marble itself had absorbed decades of political violence and was waiting to release it. Liriana stood in the center with 4 guards surrounding her and High Chancellor Velith watching from the raised platform where the council seats formed a semicircle. The woman looked exactly the same as always, composed, controlled, the picture of political efficiency, except her eyes. Those were different now, harder, like she'd finally stopped pretending to be anything other than what she was. "You found the financial records, not a question, a statement." Liriana lifted her chin. "You've been embezzling from the Empire for 2 years. Embezzling." Velith's laugh was cold, such a pedestrian word for strategic resource reallocation. "You funded Cassian's rebellion. I funded an insurance policy." The High Chancellor walked down from the platform slowly. "Your precious king was dying. Someone needed to ensure the Empire survived his inevitable collapse. So you decided to help it along? I decided to be practical. Draven was compromised, unstable. The mate bond was destroying him from the inside. The kingdom needed leadership that wasn't clouded by sentiment. Leadership like yours? Leadership like someone who understands that power requires sacrifice. She stopped a few feet away. Then you arrived. The human scholar. The miraculous mate who suddenly made everything better. She shook her head. Do you have any idea how much damage you've done? I saved his life. You made him weak. An alpha bonded is an alpha compromised. That bond you're so proud of claiming? It's a leash, a vulnerability, and enemies will use it to destroy everything he's built. The guard shifted nervously. Liriana forced herself to stay calm, forced herself to think instead of react. If you wanted me dead, I'd be dead already. So what do you want? Velith smiled, the same cold expression she'd worn during council sessions for years. I want you to understand that this isn't personal. You seem like a decent person, smart, capable. Under different circumstances, I might have even liked you. But the Empire is bigger than one woman, bigger than one king, bigger than sentiment masquerading as strength. You're going to kill him. I'm going to save him. From himself, from the bond, from the inevitable destruction that comes from letting emotion override judgment. By committing treason, by doing what's necessary. Velith turned away. When this is over, history will remember me as the woman who saved Velkrayne from a king too broken to rule. And if I refuse to cooperate, then you'll die. Painfully. And Draven will watch. And the bond will tear him apart from the inside until there's nothing left but the beast crown. She looked back over her shoulder. But if you cooperate, if you denounce the bond publicly, claim it was manipulation, forbidden magic, the thing Cassian accused you of, then I'll make sure you survive this. You'll be exiled, stripped of title, but alive. Liriana's hands curled into fists. You want me to destroy him. I want you to set him free. The bond is a chain. Breaking it is mercy. That's not how it works. Then explain to me how it works. Because from where I'm standing, your king has been dying by degrees for 2 years, losing himself, losing control. And the only thing that's changed since you arrived is that now he has something else to lose. The worst part was that Velith actually believed what she was saying, believed she was saving the Empire, believed the bond was weakness, believed that love was the thing that destroyed kings instead of the thing that made them whole. Liriana met her eyes. No. The High Chancellor sighed. I was afraid you'd say that. She gestured to the guards. Take her to the holding cells beneath the throne room. Make sure she's comfortable. We'll need her alive for the trial. Trial? Public. Tomorrow at dawn. The whole Empire will watch you confess to corrupting the king through forbidden blood magic. Then we'll execute you, and Draven will finally be free of the bond that's killing him. You're insane. I'm practical. Velith walked toward the exit. There's a difference. The guards moved to grab Liriana's arms. She didn't resist, didn't fight, because fighting now would accomplish nothing except getting her hurt. But as they dragged her from the council chambers, she reached for the bond, pushed everything she had into it. Fear, location, warning, praying Draven would feel it, praying he'd understand, praying he'd get there before Velith's plan tore them both apart. Bam! Draven felt her terror like a knife between his ribs. The bond blazed, urgent, desperate. He was running before the sensation fully registered, through corridors, down staircases, following the pull with single-minded focus that made guards dive out of his way. General Thorn caught up halfway to the council chambers. Sire. Wait. Draven didn't slow down. We have confirmation. Velith has been coordinating with at least 15 noble houses. She's been planning this for months. I don't care, you should. She has significant military support. If we move against her without... She has my mate. That stopped the general cold. They stared at each other in the middle of the corridor while the bond pulled tighter. Thorn's expression shifted. Understanding, then resignation. What are your orders? Mobilize every loyal soldier in the palace. Surround the council chambers. No one gets in or out. And the High Chancellor? Draven's eyes had started bleeding black around the edges. Leave her to me. The holding cells beneath the throne room were exactly as unpleasant as expected. Stone, damp, the kind of cold that seeped into bones and stayed there. Liriana sat on the bench with her back against the wall and tried to think. Velith's plan was efficient, brutal, and would probably work. A public trial, forced confession, execution. The bond would shatter. Draven would lose himself to the beast crown, and the High Chancellor would step in to restore order while the king was incapacitated. Clean, legal, wrapped in concern for the Empire's well-being. The perfect coup. Except Velith had made one critical miscalculation. She thought Draven would let the trial happen. Thought he'd follow protocol, legal process, the civilized rules that governed how kings dealt with treason. But Liriana knew better, because she'd seen what he became when she was threatened, had watched him tear through assassins with brutal efficiency, had felt the beast crown rise when guards tried to arrest him. Velith thought she was dealing with the controlled king who'd ruled for 8 years. She was about to meet the monster he kept chained beneath that control. And monsters didn't follow rules. Footsteps echoed down the corridor, multiple sets, armed, moving fast. Liriana stood. The cell door opened. Draven walked in like death wearing a crown. His eyes were completely black, claws extended. The partial shift that said the beast was very close to the surface and winning. Behind him, General Thorne and a dozen guards secured the corridor. Draven crossed to her in 3 strides, grabbed her face with hands that were shaking. "Are you hurt?" "No. Did they touch you?" "Just escorted me here." His breathing was too fast, too shallow. The bond between them was singing, loud and desperate, and absolutely certain she was his. "Where's Velith?" "Probably preparing for the trial tomorrow. She wants me to confess, publicly, that I corrupted you through forbidden magic. She wants you dead." "Yes. That's not going to happen." "Draven." She grabbed his wrists. "You need to listen to me. I'm listening. This is bigger than Cassian, bigger than the Eastern Rebellion. She's been planning this for months, has military support, resources. If you kill her now, I'm going to kill her now. Then you'll start a civil war. I don't care. The Empire will tear itself apart. Let it." His voice had gone rough, raw. "I didn't claim this bond just to watch you die for it. She's counting on that. Counting on you being so consumed by the mate bond that you'll sacrifice everything else to protect me." "She's right." The honesty in his voice made her chest hurt. Because Velith had been correct about one thing. The bond was a vulnerability, a weakness enemies could exploit. But it was also strength. The kind that came from having something worth fighting for beyond pure survival. Liriana pressed her forehead against his. "Then we need to be smarter than her. Can't just react. Can't let the beast make decisions. I'm not letting you die. I'm not asking you to. But if you go after her now, in this state, you'll give her exactly what she wants. Proof that the bond has compromised your judgment, that you're ruled by instinct instead of strategy. So what do you suggest? We beat her at her own game. How? Give her the trial. Let her think she's won. Then we expose her in front of the entire Empire." Draven pulled back to look at her. "You want me to let them put you on trial for treason? I want you to trust me enough to let me fight this battle my way. You could die, so could you. Every day, every decision, every war you've ever fought." She held his gaze. "The only difference is, this time we're fighting together." The bond flared between them, gold bleeding back into his eyes, slowly, fighting against the black. He was trying, actually trying to pull back from the edge, instead of just letting the beast take over. That was progress, small, fragile, but real. His hands gentled on her face. "If anything happens to you, it won't. You can't know that. Yes, I can, because you're going to be there, and so will the truth. And Velith can manipulate a lot of things, but she can't manipulate reality. She's been doing it for 2 years, in shadows, in secret, with nobody watching." Liriana stepped back. "Tomorrow the whole Empire watches, and we're going to show them exactly what she is." Draven was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to General Thorne. "Let Velith have her trial. But I want every entrance covered, every loyal house represented, and I want documentation. Every financial record, every forged authorization, every piece of evidence that proves what she's been doing." The general nodded. "Already compiled. We found enough to bury her 10 times over." "Good." Draven looked back at Liriana. Then tomorrow we end this. Dawn came too fast. The central square was packed. Thousands of people. Every noble house. Every general. Citizens from every district who'd heard about the trial and wanted to witness history. A platform had been erected in the center. Wood. Simple. The kind used for formal proceedings and public executions. Liriana was brought out in chains. Symbolic. Theatrical. Designed to show the Empire that even the Queen wasn't above judgment. The crowd murmured. Whispered. She could feel their eyes on her. Human. Outsider. The woman who'd supposedly corrupted their king. Velith stood on the platform looking every inch the concerned public servant. Draven sat on a throne that had been moved from the palace, positioned where everyone could see him, where they could judge his reaction. His eyes were gold, controlled. But Liriana could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the armrests. The beast was there, right beneath the surface, waiting. The High Chancellor's voice carried across the square. We are gathered to witness justice, to address accusations of corruption, of forbidden magic used to manipulate the mate bond for political gain. She gestured toward Liriana. This woman stands accused of using blood magic to compromise King Draven Kalor, to weaken his judgment, to make him vulnerable to outside influence. The crowd shifted, uncertain. Magic was a serious accusation, the kind that could get someone executed regardless of their connection to the throne. Velith continued. The evidence is clear. The king's behavior changed dramatically upon her arrival. The blackouts, the loss of control, the violent episodes. All symptoms of the curse trying to force the bond. Liriana's voice rang out. All documented in the covenant texts I was brought here to translate. Those texts could have been fabricated. By who? I'm a scholar, not a politician. A scholar with clear motivation to legitimize her position as queen. The crowd was listening now, really listening. Liriana pressed forward. If I manipulated the bond, why would I translate texts that expose the curse? Why reveal that refusing the mate bond causes the beast crown? Perhaps to manipulate the king into claiming you, to use his fear against him. Then explain the financial records. Velith went very still. Liriana gestured toward General Thorn, standing at the edge of the platform with documents in hand. 2 years of embezzled funds, redirected resources, forged authorizations, all traced back to the High Chancellor's office. That's absurd. Is it? Liriana held her gaze. Because those same funds match exactly with the timeline of Cassian Mordrek's rebellion, with the Eastern Army's movements, with the assassination attempts. The crowd's murmuring grew louder. Velith's expression finally cracked. Just for a second. Then the mask slammed back into place. These accusations are desperate. The last defense of a woman facing execution for treason. Then prove me wrong. Liriana's voice cut through the square. Let the records speak for themselves. Let the Empire see exactly where the money went. Who authorized the payments? Who benefited from destabilizing the king? Thorn stepped forward, held up the documents for everyone to see, started reading. Authorizations signed by the High Chancellor. Payments to known mercenaries. Correspondence with Eastern nobles discussing the king's declining health. Every piece of evidence meticulously documented. Every transaction traced. Every lie exposed. The crowd's mood shifted. Anger replacing uncertainty. Because embezzlement, they understood. Treason, they understood. And watching a woman who'd spent years positioning herself as the Empire's savior get revealed as its greatest threat, that they understood perfectly. Velith's face had gone white. She looked at Draven, still sitting on his throne, still watching with those burning gold eyes. This is a setup, a desperate attempt to discredit. No. Draven stood. This is justice. He walked toward the platform slowly. Every person in that square felt his presence. The Alpha authority rolling off him in waves. When he reached the steps, he stopped, looked up at the woman who'd served beside him for 6 years. You were right about one thing. The bond is a vulnerability. It does make me weaker in some ways. Velith's expression shifted, hope flickering across her face, but it also makes me stronger, because now I have something worth protecting beyond just power, beyond just survival. He climbed the stairs. You thought sentiment made me weak. that caring about someone would compromise my judgment. He stopped in front of her. You were wrong. The crowd held its breath. Draven's voice carried across the entire square. High Chancellor Valeth, you are hereby stripped of title and authority. Your lands are forfeit, your house disbanded, and you are sentenced to life imprisonment for treason against the crown. Not execution. Imprisonment. Valeth stared at him, disbelief written across her face. You're sparing me. I'm showing you the difference between strength and cruelty, between justice and revenge. He gestured to the guards. Take her to the black cells, maximum security. She sees no one, speaks to no one. As they moved to arrest her, Valeth finally broke. You're making a mistake. The bond will destroy you eventually. It always does. Sentiment doesn't survive in places like this. Maybe. Draven looked at Liriana, still standing in chains at the center of the platform. Or maybe I'm finally learning what real strength looks like. The guards led Valeth away. The crowd erupted, not in anger, in approval, because they'd just watched their king choose mercy over vengeance, justice over rage. And somehow, that made him more terrifying than any execution ever could. Draven walked to Liriana, broke her chains with his bare hands, pulled her against his chest, and held on like she was the only real thing in a world made of lies. The bond sang between them, whole, unbroken, stronger than before. But the celebration didn't last. That night, while the capital was still processing the trial's outcome, reports started flooding in. The noble houses Valeth had been coordinating with had mobilized 15 armies spread across the empire, all moving toward the capital simultaneously. This wasn't opportunistic rebellion anymore. This was full civil war, and it was happening now. Draven stood in the strategy room surrounded by maps that showed enemy positions converging from every direction. General Thorn looked exhausted. We can't fight on this many fronts. Even with the bond strengthening our forces, we don't have enough soldiers. How long until they reach the capital? 3 days, maybe 4. What are our options? We consolidate. Pull all forces back to defend the capital. Let the outer provinces fall temporarily and rebuild after we've survived. Draven's hands flattened on the war table. That's not an option. Sire, we spent 8 years building this empire. I'm not abandoning it now. Then we need reinforcements, and we need them fast. From where? Liriana's voice came from the doorway. Every major house is either hostile or neutral. We don't have allies left. Draven turned to look at her. Then we make them. How? By doing what I should have done years ago. He straightened. By showing the Empire that an Alpha bonded isn't weak. The room went quiet. We've been fighting defensively since the bond was claimed, proving we can survive, proving we're not compromised. He looked at the map. It's time to prove we're stronger. What are you proposing? Thorn leaned forward. We go on the offensive. Don't wait for them to reach us. Hit them first. Fast. Hard. Show them what happens when you challenge a king who has everything to lose. That's suicide. Maybe. Or maybe it's the only move they're not expecting. Liriana crossed to the war table, studied the positions. If we hit the Eastern Coalition first, the one commanded by Lord Heron, it would cut off their supply lines to the other armies. Draven nodded. And if we move fast enough, we can hit the southern forces before they realize what's happening. You're talking about a forced march, days without rest. Thorn shook his head. Our soldiers won't survive it. They will if I lead them personally. The bond will drain you. Then it drains me. But at least I'll die fighting instead of watching this empire burn from behind palace walls. Liriana grabbed his arm. You're not dying. Then help me figure out how to win this. They stared at each other across the war table. The bond pulsed between them, strong, certain. Draven looked back at Thorn. Deploy the 1st, 2nd, and 4th battalions. We leave at dawn. Tell them to bring everything they have because we're not coming back until this is finished. And the queen? Stays here, protected, where she can't be used against me. Liriana's grip tightened. No, not negotiable. I'm not staying behind while you march into a war you might not survive. You have to. Why? Because if something happens to me, the Empire needs you. The bond will survive through you, and that's the only thing that matters. The Empire needs both of us. The Empire needs hope, and you're the only one who can give them that. She wanted to argue, wanted to fight him on this, but she could see the logic, could see the impossible choice he was making. Lead the army himself and risk the bond, or stay safe and watch the Empire fall. There was no good option, only survival, and the terrible cost that came with it. Fine. She stepped back. But you take the Royal Guard, triple protection, and you report back every 6 hours. Done. And Draven? He looked at her. Don't you dare die on me. His smile was tired, worn, but real. Wouldn't dream of it. Look, the army left at dawn. 5,000 soldiers. The best Velkrayne had to offer. Draven rode at their head wearing black armor and carrying the obsidian sword his father had used to take the crown. Liriana watched from the palace balcony as they disappeared into the distance. The bond stretched, thinned, but held. General Thorn had stayed behind to command the capital's defenses. He stood beside her looking grim. He'll survive this. You sound more confident than I feel. The king has survived worse odds, not while bonded, not with this much at stake. The general was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that surprised her. The bond isn't making him weaker, it's making him desperate. And desperate is the most dangerous thing a king can be. She looked at him. Thorn met her eyes. Valeth was wrong about a lot of things, but she was right about one. The bond is a vulnerability. Enemies will use it, are already using it. So what do? We make sure they regret it. The reports came in fragments over the next 3 days. The Eastern Coalition had been hit before dawn on the second day. Draven's forces had torn through their ranks like a storm made flesh. Lord Heron had surrendered within hours. The Southern Army fared slightly better, but ultimately fell the same way. Overwhelming force delivered with brutal efficiency and zero mercy. By the 4th day, word was spreading across the Empire. The Alpha King had gone to war, and war was exactly what he brought. But the victories came with a cost. Each battle pushed the bond harder, stretched it thinner. Draven was fighting farther from the capital than any bonded Alpha had attempted. The strain was showing. Liriana felt it through the connection, exhaustion, pain, the beast rising closer to the surface every time he shifted. On the 5th night, the bond flickered, just for a second, then went silent. Liriana's breath stopped. She reached for it desperately, pushing everything she had into the connection. Nothing came back. Terror flooded through her so fast she couldn't breathe. General Thorn found her in her chambers an hour later, pacing, shaking. What happened? The bond. I can't feel him. The general's expression went carefully blank. When was the last contact? An hour ago, maybe longer. I don't know, it just stopped. That doesn't mean he's dead, then what does it mean? It means we wait, and hope, and prepare for whatever comes next. But his voice said what he wouldn't, that an alpha who lost the bond didn't survive, and a queen who lost her mate didn't either. The messenger arrived at dawn on the 6th day, covered in blood, barely conscious, carrying a message sealed in black wax. General Thorn opened it with hands that weren't quite steady. Read it twice, then looked at Liriana with an expression that made her stomach drop. What? He's alive. The relief that flooded through her nearly buckled her knees. Then she saw the rest of his expression. But the Western Coalition didn't surrender. They're holding position, fortified, and they've demanded terms. What terms? You. In exchange for standing down. The words landed like physical blows. They want me to surrender myself to them? They want the bond broken, publicly. They think without you the king will return to the ruler he was before. Strong, uncompromised, the kind of alpha who built an empire through fear instead of sentiment. And if I refuse, they'll fight, and thousands will die. Soldiers, citizens, innocents caught between armies. How long do we have? 24 hours. Then they march on the capital. Liriana walked to the window. Outside, Velkrayne stretched across the horizon, beautiful and brutal in hers. Her empire now. Her responsibility. Her choice. Save the bond and condemn thousands to death, or sacrifice herself and save them all. The bond flickered, weak, distant, but there, Draven was alive, somewhere, fighting his way back. If she surrendered now, he'd come home to find her gone, and the bond would destroy him from the inside just like the text had warned. But if she didn't surrender, they'd both watch the Empire burn. There was no good choice, only impossible ones, and the realization that being queen meant making decisions that would haunt her forever. General Thorne's voice was quiet behind her. "What are your orders?" Liriana stared out at the capital, at the city she'd sworn to protect, at the empire that depended on choices she'd never wanted to make. The bond pulsed, faint, desperate, and she finally understood what Draven had been trying to tell her all along, that love in places like this didn't survive on hope, it survived on sacrifice, and sometimes the greatest strength was knowing when to surrender everything for the thing that mattered most. She turned to face the general. "Tell them I accept their terms." General Thorne stared at her like she'd just declared war on reality itself. "You can't be serious. Do I look like I'm joking?" "My lady, this is suicide. You walk into that camp, they'll use you as leverage, break the bond, execute you anyway, and the king will lose his mind when he finds out." "Probably." Liriana's voice was steady, even though her hands were shaking. "But thousands of people will still be alive. That's worth the risk. Not to him, it's not. Then it's a good thing I'm making this decision. Not him." She walked past the general toward her chambers. "I need travel clothes, a fast horse, and an escort that won't report this to Draven until I'm already gone." Thorne followed her, his boots heavy on marble. "You think I'm going to let you ride into enemy territory without the king's knowledge? I think you're going to make a choice between following orders and doing what's necessary to save this empire. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Today they are." She stopped, turned to face him. "The Western Coalition has 20,000 soldiers. We have maybe 7,000 defending the capital. If they march, we lose. Everyone loses. But if I surrender myself, they stand down. The war ends, and Draven comes home to a kingdom that's still standing, and a mate bond that's broken. Better broken than buried under rubble." Thorne's jaw tightened. He'd served under Draven for 8 years, had watched him build an empire through violence and willpower, had seen him fight battles that should have killed him, but he'd never seen the king truly afraid until Liriana arrived. And fear in a man that powerful was the most dangerous thing in the world. "How long do I have before he realizes what you've done?" "Hours, maybe less. The bond is weak, but it's still there. He'll feel the distance." "Then you better move fast. Because when he figures it out, nothing will stop him from tearing that coalition apart to get you back." "Good. Let him. By then I'll have already surrendered and the terms will be binding. You're gambling with your life. I'm gambling with thousands of lives. Mine is just one of them." She walked into her chambers, started changing into riding leathers, practical, dark, the kind of thing that wouldn't slow her down. Thorne stood in the doorway. "The king will never forgive me for this. Then we'll both live with his anger. But at least we'll live." Eat guts. Draven felt the moment she made the decision. The bond shifted, not breaking, not dying, just moving, away from the capital, toward the west, toward the enemy coalition. His body went rigid. He was standing in a command tent surrounded by maps and exhausted generals. 5 days of forced marches and brutal fighting. 3 coalitions broken, 2 more to go. But his mate was moving in the wrong direction. Someone was speaking, reporting casualties, supply lines, something that should have mattered. He couldn't hear them over the roar building in his chest. "Get out! Sire! Everyone! Out! Now!" The command hit with enough alpha presence that every man in that tent scrambled for the exit. Draven stood alone, reached for the bond with everything he had, pushed through the distance, the exhaustion, the strain of 5 days fighting too far from his anchor. Found her, felt her determination, her fear, her absolute certainty that this was the right choice, and understood exactly what she was doing. The beast crown rose up so fast it nearly shattered his control. She was surrendering herself to save the empire, trading her life for peace, making the exact kind of sacrifice a queen should make. And he was going to burn the entire Western territory to ash for forcing that choice. He grabbed his sword, walked out of the command tent into chaos. Soldiers everywhere, setting up camp, tending wounded. The organized disorder of an army that had just won 3 impossible victories. His second-in-command appeared immediately. Your Majesty, the scouts report. How far to the Western Coalition's position, sir? Answer the question. 2 days, maybe 3 if we maintain current pace. We're not maintaining current pace. Draven's voice had gone flat, deadly. Mobilize every soldier who can still walk. We march in 20 minutes. Sire, the men need rest. They can rest when this is over. Your Majesty, with respect, you've been pushing them past human limits for 5 days. They need recovery time or we'll lose more to exhaustion than combat. Then we lose them. But we're moving. Now. The officer stared at him, saw the black bleeding into his eyes, saw the claws extending, saw the thing rising up that they'd all been terrified would happen eventually. The king was losing control, and there was absolutely nothing any of them could do to stop it. Is this about the queen? Draven's head snapped toward him. The officer took an involuntary step back. I'll mobilize the troops. He disappeared fast. Draven stood in the center of camp while the bond pulled tighter, urging him west, toward her, toward the thing that mattered more than strategy or survival or anything else. The beast inside him didn't care about politics, didn't care about peace terms or negotiations. It cared about one thing, mine. And someone was trying to take her. Liriana reached the Western Coalition's camp as the sun was setting. It sprawled across the valley like a city made of steel and violence. Thousands of tents, hundreds of banners, the organized chaos of an army preparing for siege. She rode through the outer perimeter alone. The guards watched her approach with expressions that said they'd been expecting her but couldn't quite believe she'd actually come. A woman, unarmed, riding into an enemy camp like she had nothing to lose. They weren't wrong. She dismounted at the central command post. 3 generals emerged, hard men with eyes that had seen too many wars. The one in the center stepped forward. Queen Liriana, you actually came. I gave my word. Most people break their word when survival is on the line. I'm not most people. His smile was cold. No. You're the woman who corrupted our king. I'm the woman who saved him. Perspective. He gestured toward the command tent. Shall we discuss terms? She followed them inside. The tent was larger than expected. War tables, maps, the tools of men who planned conquest for a living. 4 more nobles waited inside. Representatives from the major houses coordinating the Western Coalition. They looked at her like she was simultaneously fascinating and expendable. Lord Brennan spoke first. Deep voice. Authority that came from decades of command. You understand what you're agreeing to. The bond will be broken, publicly. I'll be executed as an example, and you'll withdraw your forces from Velkrayne territory. Close, but not quite. He leaned forward. The bond will be broken. You'll confess to using forbidden magic, but we won't execute you. Why not? Because a dead martyr is more dangerous than a living traitor. You'll be exiled, stripped of title, sent far enough away that the king never sees you again. The bond will kill him, eventually. But he'll survive long enough to stabilize the empire. To rule the way he did before you arrived. Strong, uncompromised. You mean alone. Alone is how Alpha Kings are supposed to rule. And if I refuse, then we march at dawn. 20,000 soldiers against whatever's left defending the capital. Thousands die. The empire burns, and you watch it happen knowing you could have stopped it. Liriana's hands curled into fists beneath the table. She'd known this was coming, had prepared herself for it, but hearing it out loud made it real in a way that twisted her stomach. When? Tomorrow at noon. Public ceremony, the whole camp witnesses. Then you're escorted to the southern border and we never hear from you again. And Draven? We send word that the Western Coalition has withdrawn, that peace has been restored. He returns to the capital victorious, without me, without the weakness that's been destroying him. She wanted to argue, wanted to explain that the bond wasn't weakness, but these men had already decided what they believed, and nothing she said would change minds that had been made up before she ever arrived. Fine, I'll do it. Brennan's eyebrows rose. Just like that? Just like that. You're not going to fight? Negotiate? Try to buy time for your king to arrive? He won't arrive in time, I made sure of it. The lie came easily, natural. Because Draven absolutely would arrive in time if he pushed his army hard enough. and she needed these men to believe they'd won so they'd lower their guard. Brennan studied her face, then he nodded. You'll be kept under guard until the ceremony. Comfortable quarters. Decent food. Considerate professional courtesy. How kind. We're not monsters, just practical men making hard choices. She almost laughed, because that's what everyone said when they justified cruelty through logic. We're not monsters, just practical. As if the two were mutually exclusive. Guards escorted her to a tent on the eastern edge of camp. Small, simple, a bed, a table, a chair, and bars on the entrance. Prison dressed up as hospitality. She sat on the bed, reached for the bond, found it stretched so thin it felt like spider silk, fragile, ready to snap, but still there. Draven was coming. She could feel him, rage and desperation and absolute refusal to accept what she'd done. He'd push his army past human limits, would sacrifice everything to reach her, and that was exactly what she was counting on. Because the Western Coalition expected a broken king stumbling home to find his mate gone. What they were going to get was a war machine fueled by fury and the kind of violence that came from having nothing left to lose. She just needed to survive until he arrived. But the army marched through the night. No rest. No stops. Just brutal forward momentum driven by a king who'd gone past exhaustion into something that looked like madness. Soldiers dropped. Dozens of them. Too tired to continue. Draven didn't slow down. His officers tried reasoning with him, tried explaining that they'd lose half the force before they reached the Western Coalition. He didn't care. The bond was fraying. Each hour that passed stretched it thinner. He could feel Liriana's heartbeat through the connection. Steady. Calm. Too calm. Like she'd already accepted what was coming. That terrified him more than any battle ever had, because Liriana didn't give up, didn't surrender, didn't walk into enemy camps unless she had a plan. And her plan clearly involved sacrificing herself. The beast inside him howled, not in rage, in grief, because he'd spent 2 years refusing the bond to protect himself from exactly this kind of pain. And it hadn't mattered. She'd gotten past his defenses anyway, had made him care, had made him whole, and now he was going to lose her to the same kind of political violence that had taken everything else he'd ever cared about. His second-in-command rode up beside him. Your Majesty, we've lost over 300 soldiers to exhaustion. If we don't slow down, we don't slow down. Sire, that's an order. The man fell silent. They rode another hour in darkness, broken only by torchlight. Then scouts returned with reports. The Western Coalition's camp was 2 hours ahead, 20,000 strong. Fortified positions. They weren't expecting an attack. Draven's hands tightened on the reins. Deploy the cavalry, hit their outer perimeter, create chaos. I want confusion, panic, make them think we're a larger force than we are. And the infantry? Follows my lead. Into what? The center of their camp, where they're keeping her. That's suicide. Probably. But I'm doing it anyway. His officers exchanged glances. They'd followed him through impossible situations before, had watched him turn certain defeat into victory through tactics and brutality. But this wasn't tactics, this was desperation. And desperate men made mistakes. The kind of mistakes that got entire armies killed. But looking at their king's face, they knew arguing was pointless. Draven Kalor was going into that camp, and they could either follow him or watch him die alone. One by one, they drew their weapons. For the king, for the queen, for the empire. Even if it killed them all, yunk. Liriana woke to the sound of screaming. Not pain, not fear, battle. She was on her feet instantly, ran to the tent entrance. The guards were gone, pulled away to deal with whatever chaos had erupted on the camp's perimeter. Outside, the night was on fire, tents burning, soldiers running, the organized camp dissolving into panic. And through it all, she felt him. The bond blazed, hot, close, absolutely furious. Draven was here. Her heart hammered against her ribs. He'd marched his army through the night, had pushed them past breaking, had refused to let distance or exhaustion or impossible odds stop him from reaching her. Because that's what the bond did. It turned reasonable men into forces of nature. And Draven had never been particularly reasonable to begin with. She grabbed the tent pole, used it to pry the bars loose. They were decorative, symbolic, not actually designed to hold someone determined to escape. The metal bent. She squeezed through, hit the ground running. The camp was chaos. Western Coalition soldiers scrambling to organize, officers shouting orders that got lost in the noise, cavalry thundering through the outer perimeter, cutting down anyone who tried to mount a defense. Liriana ran toward the bond, toward the pull that said her mate was tearing through this camp like a living apocalypse looking for her. She made it halfway across the central clearing before someone grabbed her arm. Lord Brennan. Armor hastily donned, sword drawn. You did this, brought him here. I didn't have to bring him. He would have come anyway. Then you've killed us all. Maybe. Or maybe you should have thought about that before you demanded I surrender myself. His grip tightened. Painful now. You're coming with me. Leverage. The only thing that might stop him from slaughtering everyone here. He dragged her toward the command post. She fought, kicked, clawed at his arm. It didn't matter. He was stronger, trained, a warrior who'd spent decades in combat. And she was a scholar who'd learned violence through desperation instead of discipline. They reached the command post. Inside, the other nobles were arming themselves, preparing for battle they clearly weren't expecting. Brennan threw her against the center table. Bind her. If the king wants her, he'll have to negotiate. Two soldiers moved forward with rope. That's when the tent wall exploded inward. Not cut, not torn, destroyed. Draven walked through the opening like death incarnate, partially shifted, claws extended, eyes completely black, covered in blood that definitely wasn't his. Every man in that tent froze, because they'd heard stories about the Alpha King, about what he was capable of when the leash came off. But stories didn't prepare you for the reality, for the presence, the power, the absolute certainty radiating off him that everyone in this tent was already dead and just didn't know it yet. Brennan recovered first, pulled Liriana against his chest, pressed a blade to her throat. One more step and I kill her. Draven stopped. The bond flared between them. Liriana could feel his rage, his terror, his desperate calculation trying to figure out how to kill everyone here without getting her throat opened. You won't! His voice was wrong, distorted. The beast speaking through a human throat. Won't I? Brennan's blade pressed tighter. You think I'm bluffing? I think you're a practical man, and practical men don't destroy their only leverage. She's not leverage if you're willing to watch her die. I'm not. Then surrender. Call off your army. Let us break the bond peacefully, and this ends without more bloodshed. Liriana felt the tremor run through Draven's body. Saw him fighting, beast and man, instinct and strategy, trying to find a solution that didn't end with her dead and him destroyed. Don't. Her voice cut through the tent. Don't you dare surrender. Be quiet. I'm serious. You surrender now, they'll break the bond anyway. Execute you as a traitor. Take the Empire. That's preferable to watching you die. Not to me, it's not. Brennan's blade pressed harder. Shut up, both of you. Blood trickled down Liriana's throat, warm, wet. The bond exploded. Draven moved. Not a charge, not an attack. Pure speed that defied human capability. He crossed the tent before Brennan could finish processing the movement. Grabbed the Lord's wrist, twisted, bone snapped. The blade clattered to the ground. Liriana dove away, and Draven tore into the Western Coalition's leadership like something unleashed from the old nightmares their ancestors used to tell. It wasn't a fight. It was slaughter. Fast. Brutal. The kind of violence that came from a creature that had stopped being human and started being something else entirely. The beast crown wasn't just rising, it had won. Liriana watched him kill Lord Brennan with his bare hands, watched him turn on the other nobles with eyes that didn't recognize mercy or restraint, watched the man she loved disappear beneath the monster he'd been fighting for 2 years, and understood with terrible clarity that she'd made everything worse. By surrendering, by forcing him to choose between her and control, she'd broken the one thing holding him together. Draven. Her voice was barely a whisper. He didn't respond, just kept killing. Methodical, efficient, like clearing obstacles instead of ending lives. Please. Still nothing. The tent was a slaughterhouse now. Bodies everywhere, blood soaking into expensive rugs. And at the center stood a king who'd finally lost himself completely to the thing he'd been terrified of becoming. Liriana stepped forward. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get away from the predator currently wearing her mate's face. But running wouldn't save him, wouldn't bring him back, wouldn't fix what she'd broken by thinking sacrifice was the same as strength. She walked directly into his line of sight. "Look at me." His head snapped toward her. Black eyes. No recognition. Just pure predatory focus evaluating threat level. "It's me. Liriana. Your mate." A growl rumbled through his chest. "I know you're still in there, still fighting, still trying to hold on." He took a step forward. She held her ground. The bond between them was screaming, fractured, damaged, but still there, still connecting them, still proving that even the beast crown couldn't completely erase what they'd built. "You claimed me." She kept her voice steady. 5 days ago, in front of the entire empire. You chose trust over fear, chose me over isolation. Another step closer. His breathing had gone ragged. "And I chose you, every day. Every decision. Even when it meant walking into an enemy camp because I thought sacrifice would save you." He stopped moving. Something flickered behind the black. Gold. Just for a second. "I was wrong." Her voice cracked. "Sacrifice isn't strength. It's just another kind of fear. Fear of losing you. Fear of watching the empire burn. Fear of making the wrong choice." The gold flickered again. "But I'm not afraid anymore." She reached up slowly, touched his face the same way she had the first time the bond shattered the beast crown. Not commanding, not controlling, just trusting that the man was stronger than the monster, that love was more powerful than instinct, that 2 years of fighting alone didn't erase 6 weeks of learning to fight together. "Come back to me." The bond answered. Surged between them like wildfire catching dry timber. The black in his eyes shattered, gold bleeding back in, fully, completely. Draven collapsed forward. She caught him. They both went down to their knees, surrounded by the bodies of men who'd thought breaking the bond would save the empire. His arms wrapped around her so tight she could barely breathe. "I thought I lost you." "You did. For a minute." She pressed her face against his neck. "But I'm here now. Don't ever do that again." "Which part? Surrendering to enemy forces or watching you go feral? Any of it. All of it." He pulled back to look at her. His hands cupped her face. Blood on both of them. "I can't survive losing you. You won't have to. You don't know that." "Yes, I do. Because we're not alone anymore. We're whole. And whole is a lot harder to break than alone ever was." Outside, the battle was dying down. Draven's army had torn through the Western Coalition's defenses like they were made of paper. 20,000 soldiers surrendering to maybe 4,000. Because numbers didn't matter when the opposing force was led by a king who'd marched through impossible conditions fueled by pure desperate fury. General Thorne appeared in the destroyed tent entrance, took one look at the carnage, then at his king kneeling in the center of it, holding his queen like she was the only real thing in a world made of ghosts. "Your Majesty, the Coalition has surrendered. What are your orders?" Draven stood slowly, pulled Liriana up with him. His voice, when he spoke, was steady. "Human. Back under control. Accept their surrender. Disarm them. Anyone who swears loyalty to Velkrayne lives. Anyone who refuses gets escorted to the border and exiled. And the nobles who organize this?" He looked at the bodies scattered across the command post. Already handled. Thorne's expression didn't change. "Understood. What about the queen?" "She stays with me. From now on. No more separation. No more strategic distance." Draven looked at Liriana. "We fight together or not at all?" She nodded. "Together." The word settled between them like a promise. Thorne left to organize the surrender. Liriana and Draven stood alone in the ruins of the Western Coalition's command. "You killed them all." "Yes. Because they threatened me. Because they thought they could force my hand, could use you as leverage, could break the bond and everything would go back to how it was before." "Will it? Will what? Go back?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled her closer. "No, I don't want it to. The man I was before you arrived was surviving, not living. There's a difference. And now I'm terrified, exhausted, barely holding on. But I'm whole. And whole is worth fighting for even when it's harder than alone ever was. She leaned into him, let his heartbeat anchor her, let the bond remind her that they'd survived. Again. Against impossible odds, through betrayal and war and desperate sacrifices that almost destroyed them both. But survival alone was never the goal. Living was. Building something worth protecting. Creating an empire that valued strength without mistaking it for isolation. Proving that the most dangerous thing in the world wasn't a king who ruled alone. It was a king who had everything to lose and refused to lose it. Outside, the sun was rising over a battlefield littered with evidence of exactly what happened when people forgot that lesson. And somewhere in the distance, Velkrayne waited, broken in places, scarred in others, but theirs. Finally theirs. If they could make it home before the next threat arrived, because empires built on violence always attracted more violence. And the Western Coalition's defeat would echo across territories that were already sharpening knives in the dark. Already planning, already moving, already betting that even a bonded Alpha King had limits. And they were right. Draven did have limits. He just hadn't reached them yet. The journey back to Velkrayne took 6 days, not because of distance, because Draven refused to push his army past breaking again, refused to sacrifice more soldiers to his desperation, because he'd learned something in that Western Coalition camp surrounded by bodies and blood, and the woman who'd walked into enemy territory thinking sacrifice was the same as strength. That survival required more than just willpower and violence. It required knowing when to slow down, when to rest, when to admit that even kings had limits. The realization didn't come easy. Every instinct he'd honed over 8 years of ruling through pure dominance screamed at him to move faster, push harder, never show weakness. But weakness wasn't the same as humanity, and he'd spent too long confusing the two. They camped the first night in a valley that had seen too many wars. The ground was still scarred from battles fought decades ago. Grass growing over graves nobody remembered anymore. Liriana sat beside him while their soldiers set up camp. Her shoulder pressed against his, the bond humming between them. Steady now. Solid. You're quiet. Thinking. About? How many people I've killed in the last week. She didn't flinch, didn't offer empty comfort. Just sat there while he counted the cost of choices made in desperation. The number was higher than he wanted to admit. Soldiers, nobles, men who'd followed orders from leaders who'd thought breaking the bond would save the empire. Most of them hadn't deserved to die. Hadn't been evil, just practical men making strategic decisions based on incomplete information. And he'd slaughtered them anyway because they'd threatened the one thing he couldn't afford to lose. That's what the bond did. Turned reasonable calculation into absolute refusal to compromise. Turned a king who'd built an empire on cold strategy into something that prioritized one life over thousands. Valeth had been right about that much. The bond was a vulnerability, a weakness enemies could exploit. But she'd been wrong about the solution. Because breaking the bond wouldn't have restored him to the king he was before. It would have destroyed what was left, turned him into the beast crown permanently, a monster ruling through pure dominance with no humanity left to temper the violence. The mate bond wasn't what made him weak. It was what kept him human when every other instinct said to stop trying. Liriana's sat found his in the darkness. You did what you had to do. That doesn't make it right. No. But it makes it real, and real is what we have to work with. He looked at her, profile silhouetted against firelight. Scholar turned queen. Human woman who'd walked into his empire carrying nothing but forbidden manuscripts and somehow changed everything. I don't know how to be this. Be what? A king who cares. Who lets people in. Who builds an empire on something other than fear. Then we figure it out together. What if I fail? Then we fail together. But I don't think you will. Why not? Because you're still here. Still fighting. Still trying to find a way to rule that doesn't require choosing between strength and humanity. Most kings don't try. They just pick one and burn everything else. You're not most kings. No. I'm worse. I'm a king who wants both and doesn't know how to balance them. So learn. Just like that? Just like that. She made it sound simple, like 8 years of violence and isolation could be undone through pure determination. But standing there in a valley full of old graves with a woman who'd proven love was stronger than strategy, he almost believed her. Isas. They reached Velkrayne on the 7th day. The capital sprawled across the horizon exactly as they'd left it. Black towers, crimson banners, walls that had stood for centuries against every threat the world could throw at them. But something was different. The gates stood open, not defensively, welcoming. Thousands of people lined the streets as the army rode through. Citizens, soldiers, nobles who'd stayed loyal when others had chosen rebellion. They weren't cheering, weren't celebrating, just watching, witnessing, acknowledging that their king had come home from a war that could have destroyed everything. And he'd won, at terrible cost, with losses that would echo through the empire for years. But he'd won. Draven rode through the streets with Liriana beside him, not behind, not separate, equals before the entire empire. Some faces showed approval, others uncertainty. A few barely concealed disgust, because half the kingdom still thought the bond was weakness, still believed an Alpha ruled best alone, still waited for proof that sentiment would destroy what violence had built. Let them wait. Let them judge. Let them decide for themselves whether a bonded king was worth following. He was done trying to be what everyone else thought he should be. The palace courtyard was packed when they arrived, every available space filled with people who'd heard the king was returning and needed to see it for themselves. General Thorne stood at the base of the palace steps, exhausted, battered, but alive. "Your Majesty, welcome home." Draven dismounted, helped Liriana down. The bond between them flared, warm, present, proof that they'd survived. Status report, the capital held. No attempts on the palace while you were gone. The Eastern Territories have pledged renewed loyalty, and we've received delegations from 6 neutral houses requesting audience. Requesting or demanding? Requesting. Thorne's expression was carefully neutral. They want to assess whether the empire is stable, meaning they want to know if I'm stable. Yes. Then let them assess. Schedule meetings for tomorrow. I want every house representative to see exactly what they're dealing with. And what are they dealing with? A king who just won 4 civil wars in 8 days and came home with his queen. If that's not stable, nothing is. Thorne almost smiled. I'll make the arrangements. Draven started up the palace steps, Liriana's hand in his, every eye in that courtyard tracking their movement. Halfway up, he stopped, turned to face the crowd. The entire courtyard went silent. His voice carried across the space without effort, the kind of projection that came from years of making sure armies heard his commands over the chaos of battle. 6 weeks ago, the mate bond nearly destroyed me. Not because it was weak, because I was too afraid to claim it. The crowd shifted, uncertain where this was going. I thought strength meant ruling alone, meant never letting anyone close enough to be used against me, meant building an empire on fear and control and the absolute certainty that I could handle anything through pure will. He looked at Liriana. I was wrong. Murmurs rippled through the courtyard. Strength isn't about isolation. It's about knowing when to trust, when to fight, when to admit that survival alone was never enough to build something worth ruling. His hand tightened around hers. This woman is my queen, my mate, my equal, and anyone who thinks that makes me weak is welcome to test the theory personally. The silence after that was absolute. Then one soldier in the back started the slow clap, then another, then dozens, then hundreds. Not everyone. Some nobles stood rigid, disapproving, already planning how to use this admission against him. But enough people were listening, enough were willing to give the bonded king a chance. That would have to be enough. The throne room that night felt different, smaller somehow, like coming home after a long absence and realizing the place that lived in your memory was larger than reality. Or maybe he'd just changed too much to fit into spaces designed for the man he used to be. Liriana stood at the window overlooking the city, still wearing travel-stained clothes, hair loose, looking nothing like the polished queens from history paintings. Looking real. You meant what you said. Out there. Every word. You just declared to the entire empire that the bond makes you stronger. It does. Half the noble houses will use that against you. Will see it as weakness. Will test you constantly, waiting for proof that sentiment compromises judgment. Let them. I've spent 8 years proving I can kill anyone who challenges me. Maybe it's time to prove I can build something that doesn't require constant violence to survive. That's optimistic. That's exhausted. There's a difference. He crossed to stand beside her, side by side looking out at Velkrayne. The fires from the siege weeks ago had been repaired. The districts rebuilt. Life continuing despite the chaos that kept trying to tear it apart. Empires were like that. Resilient. Built on foundations deeper than any single ruler. But foundations needed maintenance. Needed care. Needed leaders who understood that strength without wisdom was just violence waiting to collapse. What happens now? Liriana's voice was quiet. Now we rebuild. Reform the council. Root out anyone still loyal to Valeth's conspiracy. Redistribute power so no single person can manipulate the empire again. That's strategy. What about us? Us? You and me. The bond. What happens when the next crisis comes and we have to choose between each other and the empire again? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said the thing he'd been avoiding since the Western Coalition camp. I'll choose you. Every time. And I'll spend the rest of my life hoping that doesn't destroy everything else. That's not reassuring. It's honest. The bond doesn't make me balanced, doesn't make me wise. It just makes me human. And humans are selfish creatures who prioritize the people they love over abstract concepts like duty. So we're doomed? Probably. Or maybe being human is what saves us. Because empires built on perfect strategy and cold calculation don't account for the fact that people aren't machines. They turned to face each other. The bond pulsed between them. Steady, warm. The thing that had almost killed them both and somehow made them stronger. I'm terrified. Draven's admission came out rough. Of failing you, failing the empire, becoming the kind of king who chooses sentiment over survival and watches everything burn. Then don't be that king. What kind should I be? The kind who admits he's terrified and does the work anyway. Who builds an empire that values strength without mistaking it for cruelty. Who proves that love isn't the thing that destroys leaders. Fear is. You make it sound simple. It's not. But neither is anything else worth doing. She reached up to touch his face. The same gesture that had shattered the beast crown twice now. We survived. Against impossible odds. Through betrayal and war and sacrifices that almost destroyed us both. We did. So maybe stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. Stop expecting disaster. Stop punishing yourself for being human instead of invincible. That's a hard habit to break. Then break it slowly. One day at a time. One choice at a time. Until ruling with your heart doesn't feel like weakness anymore. And if I fail, then we pick up the pieces and try again. That's what partners do. Partners. The words settled between them like a promise. He'd never had a partner before. Never trusted anyone enough to share the weight of ruling. Never believed anyone could stand beside him without eventually using that position to destroy him. Seraphine had made sure of that. But Liriana wasn't Seraphine. Didn't want power for its own sake. Didn't see the throne as something to manipulate. She just wanted him. Broken edges and violent history and the desperate hope that maybe love could survive in places built on blood. He kissed her, slow, careful, like sealing a promise they'd both fought too hard to break. When they pulled apart, the city lights were burning below them. Thousands of lives depending on choices they'd make tomorrow and every day after. The weight of it should have been crushing, should have sent him spiraling back into the isolation that felt safer than trust. Instead, it felt manageable. Not easy, not simple, but possible, because he wasn't carrying it alone anymore. The council reforms took 3 weeks. Draven restructured the entire government, dissolved the old houses that had supported the conspiracies, elevated new families based on loyalty and competence instead of bloodline. Half the empire thought he was insane. The other half waited to see if it would work. Liriana established the Royal Archives as an independent institution, brought in scholars from across the territories, started preserving the histories previous rulers had tried to erase. Knowledge as power, truth as foundation, the kind of empire building that happened through books instead of blades. Some nobles mocked it, called it weak, proof that the human queen was corrupting their warrior king. Others saw the value, recognized that empires built on lies eventually collapsed from the weight of their own deception. The bond between them strengthened daily. Not the desperate fraying thing that had almost killed Draven, but solid, stable. The kind of connection that came from choosing each other repeatedly instead of just once. They still fought, still disagreed, still struggled with the balance between ruling and living, but they did it together. And together was proving stronger than alone ever was. Spring came slowly to Velkrayne. Snow melted from the Black Mountains. Rivers thawed. The first green things started pushing through earth that had been frozen for months. Draven stood on the training grounds watching new recruits learn combat forms. Young men and women who'd joined the Royal Guard after hearing about the wars. About the king who'd marched through impossible conditions. About the queen who'd walked into enemy territory unarmed. They fought with the kind of intensity that came from wanting to prove themselves, to be part of something bigger than survival. General Thorn approached from the barracks, older, tired, but alive. Your Majesty, the delegations from the neutral territories have arrived. They're requesting immediate audience. Tell them I'll meet with them after the training session. Sire, they've been waiting for 3 days. Then they can wait another hour. These recruits need proper instruction more than politicians need immediate attention. Thorn's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Approval, maybe? Or recognition that the king giving priority to soldiers over nobles was exactly the kind of choice that built loyalty. I'll inform them. He started to leave. Draven stopped him. General, thank you. For what? For not abandoning me when I lost control. For keeping the capital standing. For following orders even when they seemed insane. You're my king. Following orders is what I do. You had opportunities to choose differently. Valeth offered you command of the Empire if you'd sided with her? I know. Why didn't you? Because I've served under 3 kings. Your father, his predecessor, and you. And you're the only one who ever asked soldiers what they needed instead of just telling them what to do. That's a low bar. It's a rare one. Thorn's voice was steady. Most rulers think fear and respect are the same thing. You're learning the difference. That's worth following. He left before Draven could respond. The training session continued. Young guards learning forms that would keep them alive in combat. Learning to work as units instead of individuals. Learning that strength came from coordination as much as skill. Draven watched them and thought about empire building. About the difference between conquering and maintaining. Between taking power and earning it. 8 years ago, he'd taken the crown through violence. Had proven he was strong enough to hold it through pure dominance. Now he was learning that holding power required different skills than seizing it, required building systems that functioned without constant intervention, required trusting people to do their jobs without micromanaging every decision, required admitting that one person, however powerful, couldn't sustain an empire alone. The realization should have felt like weakness, like admitting failure. Instead, it felt like relief, because he'd spent 8 years carrying weight that was never meant for one person. And learning to distribute that weight didn't make him less. It made him smarter. Liriana found him an hour later still watching the recruits. She leaned against the fence beside him, hair pulled back, simple clothes, looking nothing like the polished nobles currently waiting in the palace. The delegations are getting impatient. Let them. That's very kingly of you. I'm working on being less kingly and more effective. There's a difference. Is there? Kingly is making grand gestures and maintaining image. Effective is making sure the empire functions when I'm not in the room. You've been reading political theory. You've been assigning me political theory. Because you need to understand that ruling through fear only works until someone scarier shows up. She gestured at the training grounds. This is better. Building loyalty. Teaching the next generation. Creating systems that survive beyond any single ruler. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You were just too stubborn to listen. Fair. They stood in comfortable silence watching young soldiers learn ancient forms. The same forms Draven had learned at 14, that his father had learned, that generations of Velkrayne warriors had mastered. Tradition wasn't weakness, it was continuity. The thing that anchored empires when everything else was changing. But tradition needed evolution. needed adaptation, needed leaders willing to keep what worked and discard what didn't. That balance was the hardest thing he'd ever tried to master. Harder than combat, harder than strategy, harder than ruling through pure dominance. Because it required admitting he didn't have all the answers, required asking for help, required trusting other people's judgment even when it contradicted his instincts, required being human instead of invincible. The training session ended, recruits dispersed, the grounds emptied. Draven and Liriana walked back toward the palace together, side by side, the bond humming between them. What did the delegations want? To assess whether the empire is stable, whether a bonded king can maintain control, whether sentiment has compromised my judgment. Has it? Absolutely. I make terrible strategic decisions now, prioritize people over objectives. Let emotion override cold calculation. That sounds terrible. It is. I'm a disaster, probably the worst king Velkrayne has ever had. And yet the empire is still standing, somehow, despite my best efforts to ruin everything through caring. She laughed. The sound echoed across the courtyard. Draven realized he'd been hearing that sound more often. Liriana's laugh. The way she moved through the palace like she belonged there. The small changes that said she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. They both were. Not perfectly. Not without struggle. Not without the constant pressure of ruling an empire that wanted to tear itself apart. But living nonetheless. And living was worth fighting for, even when it was harder than just surviving. The meeting with the neutral delegations lasted 4 hours. Representatives from 6 territories, all watching Draven with expressions that ranged from cautious to hostile. They asked pointed questions about the bond, about Liriana's influence, about whether an alpha compromised by sentiment could maintain the strength necessary to hold the empire together. Draven answered honestly. Didn't pretend, didn't perform, just laid out the reality. That the bond had nearly killed him, that claiming it had saved him, that he made different decisions now than he would have 8 years ago. Some delegations left satisfied, others skeptical, a few openly hostile, but all of them left knowing exactly what they were dealing with. A king who'd chosen humanity over invincibility and was willing to live with the consequences. After the last delegation departed, Draven sat alone in the council chamber, exhausted, drained, the kind of tired that came from navigating political minefields for hours without misstep. Liriana appeared in the doorway. How bad? 3 territories will maintain alliance, 2 are reconsidering, 1 is probably planning rebellion as we speak. So typical political aftermath. More or less. She crossed to him, sat on the edge of the war table. You did well. I told them I make terrible strategic decisions because I care about people. That's not what rulers are supposed to admit. Maybe it should be. Maybe empires would last longer if rulers admitted they were human instead of pretending to be gods. Gods don't make mistakes. No, they just demand worship and destroy anyone who questions them. She looked at him. You're better than that. I'm terrified I'm not. Good. Fear means you're paying attention, means you understand the stakes, means you won't make the same mistakes leaders make when they think they're invincible. The same mistakes I made before you arrived. Yes. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said the thing he'd been avoiding since the Western Coalition camp. I need to pardon Valeth. Liriana's expression didn't change. Why? Because keeping her imprisoned makes her a martyr, gives the nobles who agreed with her something to rally around. But pardoning her removes that power. She'll just plot against you again. Probably. But at least she'll do it openly where I can watch instead of in a cell where she becomes a symbol. That's strategic. That's learning from mistakes. Seraphine died and became a ghost that haunted me for years. I won't make that mistake twice. You're showing mercy to someone who tried to have me executed. I'm showing practicality to someone who believed she was saving the empire. There's a difference. Liriana studied his face. Looking for something, testing. Then she nodded. Okay? Okay? If you think it's the right move, I trust your judgment. Just like that? Just like that. The words settled between them. Simple, final. Proof that trust worked both ways. That he wasn't the only one learning to let someone else share the weight. Valeth's release happened quietly. No ceremony, no announcements, just a pardon signed by the king and delivered by guards who looked uncomfortable with the entire situation. She walked out of the black cells after 6 weeks of imprisonment looking exactly the same. Composed, controlled, the picture of political efficiency. Draven met her at the palace gates. They stood facing each other. Former allies, current enemies. The complicated space between where most relationships lived. You're letting me go. I'm setting you free to prove that mercy isn't weakness, or you're making a terrible strategic mistake. Possibly. I've been making a lot of those lately. Her expression flickered, almost amused. The bond changed you. It made me human, which apparently is the same thing as changed. Human kings don't last. Maybe. Or maybe invincible kings just last until someone more invincible comes along. Either way, empires fall. The question is what they're worth while they're standing. And what is Velkrayne worth? More than fear, more than control, more than the kind of strength that requires crushing everyone who disagrees. That's idealistic. That's exhausted. There's a difference. Violeth looked past him at the palace, at the empire she'd tried to save by destroying the thing she thought was killing it. I still think you're making a mistake. The bond is a vulnerability. Enemies will use it, are already using it. They've been trying, haven't succeeded yet. Then I'll deal with it when they do. But I won't preemptively destroy the thing that makes ruling worth surviving. She turned back to him. For what it's worth, I genuinely believed I was saving you. I know. That's why you're walking out of here instead of buried beneath the palace. That's mercy. That's practicality. You were right about some things, wrong about others, same as everyone else trying to build something in a world designed to tear it apart. He gestured toward the gates. You're free to go, anywhere in the Empire. But if you plot against the crown again, I won't show mercy twice. Understood. She started to leave, stopped, looked back. For what it's worth, she's good for you. The queen. Makes you less of a monster. She makes me more human. Whether that's good is still being determined. Veleth almost smiled. Then she was gone. Liriana appeared beside him, had been watching from the shadows. That was generous. That was strategic. She's more useful as a pardoned traitor proving I can show mercy than as a martyr proving I can't. You're getting better at this. At what? Ruling like a human instead of a machine. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. Take it however you want. They walked back into the palace together. Past guards who'd watched their king pardon a traitor and couldn't decide if that made him wise or weak. Time would tell which. But either way, the choice was made. The mercy extended. And empires were built on choices like this. Small moments that accumulated into the kind of foundation that could weather storms or crumble under pressure. Draven was betting on the former, hoping for it, terrified it wouldn't be enough, but trying anyway. Because that's what living required. Trying. Failing, learning, trying again. The alternative was giving up, returning to the isolation that felt safer, but ultimately led to the same kind of slow death the Beast Crown promised, and he'd fought too hard to survive to choose death now. Summer arrived with heat that made the Black Mountains shimmer. The Empire settled into something resembling peace. Not perfect, not without tension, but functional. The neutral territories that had been reconsidering their alliances chose to maintain them. The one planning rebellion thought better of it after watching what happened to the Western Coalition. Velkrayne breathed, slowly, carefully, like something wounded learning to move again without breaking. Draven spent less time in the council chambers and more time in the territories, visiting provinces, meeting with local leaders, listening to problems instead of just issuing solutions. It was exhausting. Frustrating, required patience he didn't naturally possess, but it worked. People who'd feared their king started seeing him as something else, not softer, not weaker, just present, real. A ruler who understood that empires were made of people instead of territory. Liriana transformed the royal archives into something that attracted scholars from across the known world. Preserved texts, translated histories, built a repository of knowledge that would outlast any single reign. Together they proved that bonded kings could rule effectively. That sentiment didn't compromise judgment. That strength came in forms besides pure dominance. Some nobles still disagreed, still plotted, still waited for proof that the bond would destroy what violence had built. Let them wait. Let them watch. Let them see that empires built on trust lasted longer than empires built on fear. The anniversary of Liriana's arrival came quietly. 1 year since she'd walked into Velkrayne Palace carrying forbidden manuscripts and a royal summons sealed in black wax. 1 year since the bond had recognized her before Draven ever spoke her name. 1 year of war and betrayal and desperate choices that almost destroyed them both. They stood on the throne room balcony overlooking the capital, the same balcony where Draven had first watched her and thought the word that had terrified him more than any battle. Mine. It still terrified him, but for different reasons now. Not because claiming her would destroy him, because losing her would. The bond pulsed between them, strong, steady, the thing that had almost killed them and somehow made them stronger. 1 year. Liriana's voice was quiet. Feels longer. Feels like we've lived several lifetimes in 12 months. We have. Just condensed into an impossible timeline. She leaned against him, head on his shoulder, the kind of casual intimacy that came from choosing each other daily instead of just once. Do you regret it? Which part? Any of it. All of it. The bond. The wars. The choice to trust instead of ruling alone. He was quiet for a long moment. Every day. And never. That's contradictory. That's honest. I regret the people who died. The suffering. The mistakes. The times I chose wrong and people paid for it. But I don't regret you. Don't regret learning that strength comes in forms I never understood. Don't regret proving that love isn't the thing that destroys kings. Fear is. You've said that before. Because it's true. I spent 8 years terrified of being vulnerable, of letting anyone close, of admitting I needed anything besides my own will. And now I'm terrified of different things. Of failing you. Of not being enough. Of watching the empire collapse despite trying. But you're trying. Yes, that's the difference. You could have given up, could have gone back to ruling alone, could have decided the bond was too hard and broken it, would have killed me. I know. But you didn't know that a year ago. You just chose to try anyway. Below them, Velkrayne stretched across the horizon, lights beginning to glow as evening fell. Thousands of lives continuing despite the chaos that kept trying to tear everything apart. The empire was imperfect, flawed, built on foundations that included violence and blood and choices made in desperation. But it was also resilient, evolving. Learning that strength without wisdom was just violence waiting to collapse. Draven thought about the boy who'd taken the crown at 22, about the man who'd ruled through fear and isolation, about the king who'd been dying by degrees because he was too afraid to claim the thing that could save him. That person felt like a stranger now. Someone he used to be before he learned that surviving wasn't the same as living. The bond had taught him that. Liriana had taught him that. War and betrayal and desperate choices had taught him that. And the lesson was simple, brutal, true. That the most dangerous thing in the world wasn't a king who ruled alone. It was a king who had everything to lose and chose to keep living anyway. He pulled Liriana closer, felt her heartbeat against his chest, felt the bond singing between them, felt the weight of ruling an empire that depended on choices they'd make tomorrow and every day after. It should have been crushing, should have sent him back to the isolation that felt safer. Instead, it felt like possibility. Not easy, not simple, not guaranteed to work, but possible. And possible was enough. Because empires weren't built in single moments, they were built through accumulated choices, through learning from mistakes, through proving that strength came from facing fear instead of running from it, through choosing love even when every instinct said it was weakness, through building something worth protecting instead of just surviving, through being human instead of invincible. And Draven had spent too long being invincible to go back now. He was human, flawed, terrified, exhausted, but whole, finally whole, and whole was worth fighting for even when it was harder than alone ever was. The sun set over Velkrayne, darkness spreading across the empire like a blanket, stars beginning to emerge in the sky above the Black Mountains. Somewhere in the territories, enemies were plotting, planning, sharpening knives in the dark while waiting for proof that bonded kings couldn't survive. Let them plot. Let them plan. Let them try. Because the Alpha King who'd conquered 3 territories before 30 had learned something more valuable than conquest. That true strength wasn't about dominance. It was about resilience, about building foundations that could weather storms, about creating something worth protecting beyond pure survival, about proving that love wasn't the thing that destroyed empires. Fear was. And Draven Kalor had survived too much to be afraid anymore. He had a queen beside him, an empire worth ruling, and the kind of future that came from choosing hope over despair. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything.